anonymous. So there's no hands-on even from a school staff perspective. So when the student has done their survey, they actually have to bring it and put it into an envelope. They don't hand it in to a teacher to maintain confidentiality and to encourage students to be candid with their entries. So when we became aware of this, we had contacted the family, and the family had asked that it not be submitted, but at that point it's in an envelope and invisible. So the survey people said, well, they won't include the 7th grade data, that they'll include the 8th grade data. So unfortunately for this cycle, 7th grade data wasn't included. But as we look at it from a school perspective, we are able to still tease out the patterns that we have been seeing over the last couple of years, still stay consistent with what we've been seeing, both from the challenges and also from the strengths. So those are the data pieces just to be aware of as we move through. And then Ray, I think, is going to start with this. Yep.
So Jen and I will go through all of the data, and then we'll have kind of what currently we're doing to work with the issues here, and then also the next steps at the end, and then we'll have a chance for questions, but definitely feel free to ask questions as you go as well with that. The first section is the bullying violence, and the first question you look at, you see the middle school and the high school, is do you feel safe at school? At both schools it's 92% strongly agree to that, and in both situations we're slightly above the state average with that, which is something we feel good about. Obviously we want to get our 92 number even higher, but something that that was a number that we felt good about. And then the second part is, have you ever been bullied on school property? And you look at, we're under the state average at both, and it does drop at the high school, which is, natural, what we kind of see. The bullying does kind of heightens at the middle school. And obviously goal is to get the number at our 2 middle schools down from 36, but we are below the state average with that, but it's always the goal to continue to see that fall lower than it is.
So in terms of talking about suicide and depression, one thing that you'll note on this particular slide, but also throughout the presentation, is that there are some questions that were asked only of high school students. So the high school survey goes a little bit more in depth than the middle school survey was. So for example, this top question, which is clearly a number that we are consistently addressing and concerned about, is during the past 12 months, the percentage of students who felt so sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks in a row was 25% at the high school level. We're below the state average there too, but clearly a concern of ours of 1 in 4 students feeling this way at the high school. And then the second question was asking about, from whom did you get help if you were feeling this way? And then we were above the state average of the percentage of students who are seeking help from an adult. And while the number's 3% of students who are seeking help from a teacher or school staff. One thing we questioned about that the wording of that is, would it have changed if they had added specific words like a guidance counselor or a social worker? It's just not the way that the question is worded, which was just something that we were thinking about when we were reviewing the data.
I'm sorry to ask this before we get to the end, but I'm just wondering participation rates at the high school and at the middle school?
I have the numbers behind me that I can check in just a second, but it's very high. The goal is 100%, which is...
we had 221, which I don't remember any opt-outs, and I think that every kid that was in school.
And there's not a makeup day for this because of the confidentiality and things like that. So that's one thing that comes into play. So the next question that we pulled out was, have you ever seriously thought about attempting suicide? And you can see that the number has increased at the middle school. In 2017, it was 10% of students. That's increased to 14%. You can see that the state average has increased as well. At the high school, it was slightly lower at 11%. And again, we're below the state average, but clearly always concerned that this is a number that we were wishing would be at 0 for both schools. Shifting to tobacco use, and this is, I'll address the vaping piece. This is separate from vaping. This is in particular about cigarette smoking. And this is where there's some good news, that our tobacco use at the middle school and at the high school has been consistently low. And so when they asked the question at the high school of how many students had smoked a cigarette in the last 30 days, the state average was 7.1%, and at the high school it was 3.6%. Certainly happy that that we see those numbers that are low. The other question that they asked of the high school students was, do they believe that smoking cigarettes poses a significant risk to their health? And we were happy to see that 91% of our students think that smoking does produce a risk to your health. The vaping information, I think anybody who's associated with the high school knows that Mr. Mellon and I have been on a campaign about informing students and parents about the dangers of vaping and the usage of vaping. Unfortunately for this report, there was some issues statewide with the individual school data. It was in the way that the questions were worded and worded differently from 2017 to 2019. And they felt like that had compromised the data. So we did not receive our individual school data. What we did receive is that the state created an information page just about vaping that I'm holding in my hand like this, that we can get everybody copies of. Oh, you have it. Okay, great. And so this is not school specific, so we don't have our numbers just for FHS. But you can see that they're estimating that 1 in 2 high school students have used an e-cigarette ever, and 1 in 6 in middle school. And so this is information that we have been consistently aware of over the past 2 years, that these numbers have increased. And for all the different categories, we're really going to talk about the action steps that we're currently taking and the things that we want to do in the future at the end of this presentation. We put it here for vaping just because we don't have the specific statistics, but that we have had a strong commitment to sharing information with students by email and advisory. We've held parent information sessions that Casco Bay CAN facilitates that are called table talks. We've done them during the day and at nighttime. One thing I didn't add in here that we did for our staff was we took a pile of confiscated items that we had collected and shared it at a staff meeting so they could know exactly what they were looking for, what a vaping device looks like, the range of what they look like, what the pods look like, and had an open discussion with staff about educating them about that. We participate in a program called SERP, which is a student intervention program that Casco Bay CAN runs. That's really about decision making. It's a weekend program, and so we refer our students at the high school who have been in violation of our vaping policy to attend this. They don't all attend, but many have, and they're not happy to go for a weekend. It's a full weekend, but everyone has said that it has been a helpful information. The good news that I'll share with the board is that we're seeing more and more students asking for and responding to information about quitting. That's what we're really been focused on. And so every student who is disciplined at the high school for something involving vaping also gets information about how to access. There's free resources where they'll do 3 counseling sessions over the phone. We give them apps that they can use on their phone, websites that they can access for help about quitting. And we really emphasize that in our conversations. And we talk about it in health class. I got to sub health class, and those poor kids talked about pretty much nothing except vaping. And so those are just some of the things that we've done to address this concern, which is a nationwide concern. The CDC has come out and said that this is like at epidemic levels across the nation. And so it's certainly something that we are focused on educating staff, student, and parents about.
The next section focuses on alcohol use. And the first question there looks at have you ever had a drink of alcohol other than a few sips? And for the middle school students, it was 13% said they had, so just a hair below the state average. The high school question is worded slightly different. During the past 30 days, how many days did you have at least? How many of the days did you have at least one drink of alcohol? And once again, just below the state average, but still at 17% had at least one drink of alcohol in the last 30 days. And then the last question is, if you wanted to get some alcohol, how easy would it be to get some? And you notice that's one thing where the middle school is saying they have more access to it than the average, just above the state average with that outside of school at home, and the high school is just below the state average there with that. The next couple questions are just about the high schools. How wrong do your friends feel it would be for you to have 1 to 2 drinks nearly every day? Good to see that 86% believe that's very wrong, higher than the state. And for the parents, I mean, that's great to see 97% of the kids feel their parents think it would be wrong for them to have 1 to 2 drinks of alcohol every single day. Have you ever used marijuana? The middle schools are at 4%, about a little more than half of the state average with that. And then for how many times have you used marijuana in the last 30 days? This is of the students that responded yes, and it's at least once. It said 16% of the people. So below the state average, but still 16% of those students using it regularly. If you wanted to get marijuana, how easy would it be? And once again, below the state average on both of those. But it definitely gets easier as they get to the high school.
Older.
He meant as they get older.
Sorry. Better choice of words. As they get older.
So one piece of information that I think was striking to us at the high school, we looked at this with Charlie Mellon and our support staff team, with our social worker, our nurse, and all of our guidance counselors, is that if you think back to the slides about alcohol and about tobacco, is that there is a perception from kids that the data is showing us that kids think that there is more risk of using alcohol and more risk of using tobacco than there is of marijuana. So this question of how much do you think people risk harming themselves if they use marijuana once or twice a week, 42% of our students think that there's some risk or a significant risk. So that's a significant amount of our population who thinks that there is no risk to using marijuana once or twice a week. And also that number being 97% of them think that their parents think it would be wrong for them to have 1 or 2 drinks of alcohol a day. They think 85% of the kids think it's wrong or very wrong, think their parents would think it's wrong for them to use marijuana. So that's definitely a striking number for us in thinking about this idea. And I think obviously the legalization of marijuana has played a role into this, but this idea that that alcohol is something dangerous and marijuana is not. So that's a piece of data that stuck out to us. In terms of prescription drugs, again, this was slightly different questions at the high school. During the past 30 days, how many times did you take a prescription drug without a prescription? The middle school is right at the state average of 3% at least, that they've done that at least once. And at the high school, we're slightly below the state average, 8%, where the state average is 12%. And then there were additional questions for the high school of, during the past 12 months, has anyone offered, sold, or given you an illegal drug on school property? 17% of students at the high school said yes. again, below the state average, but obviously that's a concern for us at that 17% number. And then this question was, my family has clear rules about alcohol and drug use. So it's good to see that 92% of our students feel that there are clear rules at home, though obviously that's impacted by that perception of whether they think it's dangerous or not. So that was another thing that piqued our interest.
The next section is around health, and this question had to do specifically with, have you ever had sexual intercourse? And if you look at the middle school data, it switched from 2017 of 3% to 8% in 2019, where the state average only went up by 1%, whereas the high school didn't do it in 2017, but they are below the state average at 33% as opposed to 38%. So this was definitely something that was concerning for us to look further into and make sure we're covering that in health classes and looking at that. The one thing that we have speculated about there is that there's no 7th graders in Durham in this. So if you take that out, if you figure if they're more likely to be sexually active in 8th grade than they are in 7th grade, the number's probably not 8% if we had the 7th graders in from Durham, but it's still higher either way. So it's definitely a concern for us moving forward. The next question talks about assets and relationships, and the first question is, percentage of students believe they have one teacher that really cares and gives help and support when needed. And this was one that was very concerning for us, because we saw a drop by 11% at the middle school level there with that, where the high school was above the state average like we were in 2017, but definitely not the same in 2019. So it's definitely very concerning and something that we will be looking further into and talking about more as staffs. The second is, do you agree or disagree that the community feels like you matter to people? And at both schools, higher than the state average, they think the community really cares about them.
So these were, again, questions that weren't asked of middle school students. They were asked only of high school students. How often does your school enforce rules fairly? 54% of our students said most of the time or always, which is above the state average at 46%. And then the question of, how often do adults in your school address conflict, negative language, and bullying in positive ways to help students? 37% said most of the time or always. That's above the state average, but certainly a number that we would like to see higher than that. And so moving on to some of our current action steps, some of the things that we are doing to address our variety of points that were brought up by this data. One is that particularly in the last 2 years, we've had a focus on wellness directly through our guidance counselors, but also something that's been pervasive across the school of trying to offer more wellness, not just activities, but even simple tips. An example of that is before the holidays, our guidance counselors send emails about how sometimes the holidays are very stressful and sometimes they're not a happy time for people, and that's okay, and where to seek resources. But then also offering mindfulness, yoga, meditation, things that we're doing throughout the day. And we have been very lucky to have the grant that supported our creation of the Zen Room. If you haven't seen the Zen Room, you should see it. It's great. It's just a small space, but something that's used quite often. I explained the CERT program, so that has been something that we've been actively participating in for the last 4 years. We contract with a substance abuse counselor. She's here 1 day a week. It's highly confidential who she works with, but she has a full caseload for 1 day. It's only 1 day a week, but she is consistently working with a small number of our students. We continue to offer those parent information sessions through Casco Bay CAN. I think one thing that that we have not talked about a great deal with that is alcohol. Really, those have focused on marijuana and vaping. And I think that that's something that we can easily add into those parent sessions when we see about the number of students who are using alcohol or have used alcohol at the high school. We do sharing information through research and articles that we can blast out via email to parents. Try to do that in particular about vaping. That's really that we've done that a lot. And we do that with students as well. Our guidance counselor, social worker, and our nurse are very active in getting students information about where and how to get support. There's posters in the classrooms that say need to talk, and then say a list of who's available in the school. We made little cards that everybody got. We did a wellness activity in advisory with all of the students, and then it was a small, like, wallet-sized card that they could have the crisis number and all of the people in school that they could contact to talk to for help. And then we have had a faculty focus, particularly last year, on building connections with students. We dedicated faculty meetings to that last year, talking about individual students, how we build stronger connections, with the hope of, we'd love to see 100% of students say that they have a strong connection with at least one adult in the building. So those are our action steps. And Rhea might be able to give you a perspective on some of those, not to put Rhea on the spot, but as a senior, she has participated in some of the activities that she might be able to share her perspective on that too.
So a lot of the things that the high schools talked about are taking place and on our list also. We, within the wellness curriculum that all of our students take in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, definitely address the drug, alcohol, sex ed, and mental health type things, as well as through the counseling, the social workers, and the guidance for that. We have an advisory program that touches on many of these topics, but we are looking at next year increasing and improving that advisory calendar. Cynthia has that advisory program. Cynthia has some money in there to help bring in some more training and PD around that for the both middle schools there with that. We also have been taking part in a mindfulness study where we've had a control group go through a bunch of activities this fall, and now we are just now doing the group that was not in the control group, because everyone's going to get it, that we have taken, that many of our students have taken place, but by the end of the year, all students will have gone through all of the mindful activities in this study with that. And the vaping is one thing that I didn't list here, but last year, we definitely had a lot more vaping than we had this year, and I think for a combination of reasons, but I think one big reason is the national media and the national focus on vaping and how bad it is. Our middle school kids, when they see some of those articles and some of those videos and different things that we've shared with them, it really has had an impact with them, because last year, if I stood here at this time, I would say we have a major vaping problem at the middle school, and I don't feel the same way this year. I know there's some parents here of middle school kids too that the bathrooms don't smell as fruity as they used to a year ago with that. So that's been a nice change on the national front that's helped us. Future action steps, and this is really for all of us, is we're all going to take the data back and share the positives, the negatives, and have discussions with our staff. We're looking, increase education through our guidance programming, at the middle schools and high school as well. We're going to share the data with the K-5 counselors and administrators. Most already have seen it. With that, continue to support staffing and programming for social and emotional learning for all students. And then, where there are specific areas in this that, one school has that maybe the other school doesn't have, definitely focus on those areas of concern for each school. And then continue with increased parent education, through our guidance counselors, through our staff, and definitely with the support of Casco Bay Can, who's done a great job of being a support for us in this area. With that, any other things to share?
And just to go back to Maddie's questions, we had 483 students complete this survey, and we were at 580 students last year, so just under 100.
That would be
Questions for
85%? 80.
fighting over math? Suzanne.
80%.
Okay, I've got one, possibly two questions. One of the early questions you spoke about was on suicide and depression. And you had the question of, during the past 12 months, when you felt sad or hopeless, from whom did you get help? And you mentioned an adult, and I realize that this is taken from a pool of many more questions, but just wondering if there was a trend of, making sure that the students are getting help in some capacity, and whether that's from non-direct contact, online fora, research from friends, medical professionals that are not connected with the school, or even maybe with the school, but where that help is coming and that we're ascertaining that that's actually happening.
So that's really difficult to track. When we, our teachers are mandated reporters, and at the high school, they are very, very good about sharing concerns. And then our support staff acts on it immediately. What's difficult is that some of the students who are feeling this way are not reaching out to anyone, and so it's difficult for us to decipher where they're getting help from. So what we're trying to do is put those resources in kids' hands as much as we possibly can, particularly the crisis number that's in Maine, because they are such a strong resource for where kids can get other types of help. So that's really what we're trying to do, is make sure that kids have access to that.
And I think that's where I was going with other questions addressed, that help was being obtained.
No, there weren't other questions specific about like where did they get that help.
Right.
No,
Okay.
not other than the question about a teacher or staff.
Okay. And the second question I had was on the vaping issue, in that I know several schools recently in the state have changed their discipline policy in relation to vaping, and that it used to be more discipline focused, and they've stepped back on maybe suspensions or detentions and focused more on the help of combating addiction or other forms of social control, and whether that's allowing students to go to the bathroom during class or whatever that may be. I'm just wondering what the current discipline situation is.
So we, I would say that we use a combination of both. We have not, some schools are implementing smoking cessation programs. We haven't done that on site. But what we have done is that often we're giving students the chance to have a lesser consequence at school if they are willing to participate in SERP, because SERP is intense. It's 6 hours for both days on the weekends. There's a small number of students who have chosen to take the school consequence instead and not participate in that. But we've also really tried, to have parallel things. We do have consequences at school still, so that might include suspension. It also, sadly, we've had a number of athletes who have violated that policy, so then that impacts their eligibility for sports as well. But then with that, then we're offering support for how to quit. That's really something that we're trying to emphasize.
Vale. Thank you. This is great data. I had a question about the programming that you offer the students and all the supports. Is there any follow-up to see how effective those are? Because I do talk to my students, my kids who are in middle school and high school, and I do hear about all the different programs that they're exposed to. Sometimes I get the impression that it doesn't really serve the purpose that we're targeting. So, for example, Casco Bay Can will come and they'll expand on all the dangers of vaping. And they'll come home and say, well, yeah, they're saying this and that, but I don't really believe it. So is there any way that you guys can have a pulse of how the students are responding to all the efforts?
So it depends on what we're talking about. You know, the vaping thing is an incredible battle that we're fighting right now. At the high school, we've done this presentation that's sponsored by Maine Department of Transportation that's called Choices Matter. We've done that twice, once this year and once 2 years ago. So all 4 grades will have seen it. And it's about the choices that you make. And they're national speakers who come and present about a tragedy in their life that was from a choice that they made. I think talking with kids, that was incredibly impactful both times that we did that presentation. We pulled together a group of students last year at the high school with magical pizza and ice cream, as we always do. Sorry, nutrition committee. And
Hey,
we asked
we're
them.
Still on it.
Yeah,
We're still a committee.
and we asked them, like, what would be the most powerful thing to have students quit or not start vaping, and unanimously kids said, like, pump us with facts, you know, not about lecturing, you know. And so those are my emails that kids are frankly very tired of, but that's okay. And so, you know, trying to get that information out. So yesterday, I don't know if people saw, it was either yesterday or today, it was announced that another death was related to vaping. And so then I forward that article to students and just say, this is the facts. This is what came out in the news. And so those are the things that we're trying to get a voice from students about what they think is the most effective. Casco Bay Can at the high school doesn't present to students. They don't ever do that. They only present to parents.
And my follow-up question was the guest speakers that are brought to the school. Like you said, the ones that are most impactful are the ones who have had issues themselves that they have recovered from. How often do we do that? Because by far, that's what I always hear makes the most difference.
We've done that at the high school at least once a year. The other one we had, I don't know if you remember this, Rhea, was an ER trauma nurse. That one was pretty impactful. And so she brought students up on stage and talked about, like, what would happen if you had your stomach pumped from alcohol. It was kind of straight facts. And so we try to do that once a year. What's tough is that we don't all fit into the FPAC anymore. And so it's a choice about who sees it and how often we do it. And so we're trying to make sure that every grade level gets some kind of exposure to those programs. And we'll continue with that. I don't know if you want to answer that.
No, I think that's, we did the ER nurse as well. We came over here with our students, slightly different presentation. They didn't have all the pictures that the high school kids got to see. But we did that. So we have brought in some outside speakers with that. And once again, Casco Bay Can really does just present to our parents. But, you know, we had a parent night on Monday to talk about anxiety and how to support your kids with that. And we had a great turnout for what our parent night is. But if you think we have 350 kids, that's 700 parents. We had 20 there, and that was a great turnout. So we're not really reaching the parents to the level that we would like to when we offer those things.
Rhea.
I have a few questions / comments. Firstly, I would suggest in future years when we take this survey, really emphasizing the confidentiality a lot more. I know we had it a lot. We had emails about it, in an advisory we did it, but it felt like if every advisor is told, like, no one's gonna know, and hearing it now, I'm realizing, wow, this really is incredibly confidential. But before it was like, I mean, kids don't want to say, like, yeah, I drink every day. I mean, that's not something you're gonna put down on a piece of paper if you think there's any chance of anyone seeing it. So I would say just in future years, really pushing that. And then also, yeah. So along with that, for the question, I don't know. You guys don't write the questions. Okay, then never mind.
We'd like to.
Yeah, I'm sure. And then for the, I don't remember since I took the survey a while ago. I was just wondering if the survey addresses, like, safe sexual conduct and, like, health literacy. And I was thinking, like, if maybe I should write a letter to the state or something. But like, just the question, like, have you had sexual intercourse, like, that covers something, but knowing about, like, the the resources that there are and everything. That's a very different question. I think that's a lot more important for students to know about.
I'll just say, surprisingly, that is the only question that they ask, the one we presented. You know, some of the other questions, about smoking tobacco or something like that might have had 4 or 5 questions. That's the only question.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
you should write a letter.
I will.
And I think they used to, because I went onto the site that Mara had sent, and the dashboard didn't have 19 loaded yet, so I was going through 17. And one of the questions is, after sexual intercourse, is do you use a condom?
Yeah.
So they used to have follow-up questions. They decided apparently not to do that anymore.
That's
So,
interesting.
Yeah.
And then lastly, for the parent information sessions with Casco Bay Can, are there student information sessions?
We have not done that. We
might be
haven't. But
I don't know if students would go, but I would say that could be a good resource.
yeah, no, that is a great idea. And so their focus has been these information sessions for parents. My question is, do you think kids would go?
I mean,
Can you
I
make
mean, yeah.
pizza and
I know
whatever
if
you have to
food,
do to get
but
them
like
there?
also, I mean, it could be like the other thing. It could be like a more like if you're caught vaping, you go to this, and that's maybe. Yeah. And along with that, I just have to say bathrooms, the bathrooms, locking them, that policy when students are found vaping or there is vape smoke in a bathroom, it's locked, and it doesn't. I've heard many complaints from the student body about this, because I personally have gone out of class to go to the bathroom and have to walk across the entire school, missing class. So it is kind of detrimental to the learning process, and I would just suggest. I know there aren't a lot of options, but
We locked down the bathroom that they were in.
So that's not always the case.
Oh.
It depends.
Okay.
If there is a smell of marijuana, we lock down the
Yeah, that
bathroom.
makes
That's
sense.
rare.
Yeah.
That's rare that happens. If we're in the middle of trying to figure out what has happened or been damaged or something like that, or we're searching a bathroom, because often we find the vaping devices in the bathroom, then we close the bathroom temporarily. But it's never our goal to close
Yeah,
the
yeah, I
bathrooms.
understand.
And there's often times that if it's very clear, because we have a very extensive security camera system in this building. If it's very clear, then we don't lock the bathrooms at all.
Okay.
So bathrooms are often more locked. We struggle with damage to bathrooms. I don't know why that happens at the high school level, but it is something that we consistently struggle with more than vaping.
Okay, thank you.
Maddie.
I'm getting the same feedback about bathrooms and missing class at home regularly. And I want to echo, imagery is great as a deterrent. I grew up in a household where the Journal of American Medicine was often put in front of me, and some of my behavior was because of that. We have some new board members. Those of you who know me probably know what I'm going to talk about, which is Challenge Day. We had something in the high school for 4 years in a row called Challenge Day for our incoming freshman class. It is something that members of the community who volunteered in other schools gave their own money to get it started in the high school. And I was lucky enough to be a volunteer in that for 4 years. And it's something that was miraculous to witness, that built connections between students and the adults in their community and in their school. And it's the kind of thing that I think over time would have a significant impact on the feeling a student has that there are adults in their community and among the staff who care about them. I continue to be distressed that we don't do it anymore. And I know there were some challenges with it, but I'm concerned that we did away with it so easily. And I would ask that we continue to look at a way to bring that back. This is the first year that we've not offered that to the freshman class. It's something that I think it would have been a significant culture building opportunity over time. And I'm going to bring it up every time we see this data. I see these points, because I don't doubt that we care. I know you both, you all administrators all care very much about our students. But I would like to see that kind of programming that we know has been really helpful. There's certainly more we could have done with it to keep it alive throughout the school year, and that's difficult to do. But I continue to be sad that it's gone.
I'll just make a quick comment to just say, you know, what I've shared with the board before. I think it was a powerful day when I participated in it. We did not see it carry through as something that was pervasive in our culture here. Unfortunately, I think there were maybe some action steps that we could have taken. What we have done this year, you know, I think the LL Bean trips were an amazing experience for the kids who went. The freshmen had the highest rate of participation for kids who went. And then we have money in the budget because LL Bean donated all of that time for us, that we're going to do a second event for freshmen this year, just for freshmen, for some community building for them, with the hope that having two different events will help to sustain that and carry that through. And then they'll go to, the hope is they'll go to LL Bean every year for 4 years and have this culture building. Where we saw it the most was on the ropes courses, where they had to work together and be in small groups. And so what we've discussed is that because only a third of the freshmen did that, the others kayaked or did paddleboarding, that the idea is that they would all do that together this spring. So we're looking at things like that. And again, I think that there were so many benefits to Challenge Day, but it wasn't something, as Vali had asked earlier, like, what's the sustainability of it? We didn't see as something that was seeping into our culture in the way that we had hoped that it would.
As someone who experienced Challenge Day, I would say that it has greatly impacted my high school experience, in that I remember it at least once a week, just the certain experiences I had on that day. What I would say is that I don't think, we talked about how much it cost, and I think that to do activities like such as those, we don't have to pay for people to come to the school to do them. Like, we could do LL Bean activities. We could just do stuff in the gym with our own facilitators from the school that could have the same impact. And I would be very willing to help in those, in creating something that would be like the cross the line activity that we did was definitely the most impactful, where the facilitator would say something like, cross the line if you've ever felt discriminated against because of the color of your skin, and people would cross the line if they had that, and it was created a real feeling of solidarity with the students, and it was very, very powerful. So I would just say, like, we can do stuff like that without Challenge Day in the gym, and I would really strongly encourage it.
Thank you. Vali.
And I would like to respond and say that, yes, I did have concerns about the follow-through to Challenge Day, but I 100% share Maddie's sentiment about the value of Challenge Day and how great it was. And I did talk to my son about Challenge Day versus LL Bean, and he did say LL Bean was a fun day, but there wasn't really any deep emotional benefit to it. It was just a nice day out with his friends, which he really appreciated. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to take the value away from that day, but it doesn't replace Challenge Day. So I would strongly encourage the school to look at some of the other proposals that have been made that mimic the intense effect of Challenge Day, which unfortunately right now nothing else is providing. Thank you.
I had a more technical question. So one of the, when I was trying to get the data on the website, it obviously can't get school data, but it breaks it by county. Do they split? I was just noticing the difference, the strong difference between Androscoggin County and Cumberland County in a lot of these. Do they split by physical location, or does Durham get rolled into Cumberland?
I think Durham goes with Androscoggin.
It does. Okay. I mean, that was, it was interesting. I mean, and I don't imagine we see quite that split between our two schools. What's that?
That's a socioeconomic split.
Right.
As much as anything else.
Right.
Think about the rest of Androscoggin County.
Yeah. That was my thought, but I was just curious where, if we were looking for our data, where it flows into. So presumably we help those Androscoggin County numbers. And then my other question or concern was about the 7th grade data. That's disturbing that I mean, what if that had happened at the high school, like the whole high school gets tossed? Or, I mean, I know that people have the right to opt out, but if your kid takes it anyway, like, sorry, they put it in the envelope. I mean, is there a way to say, tell your kid not to take the test next time?
No, this actually speaks a little bit to Rhea's point, which is that the people who conduct it are incredibly serious about the confidentiality, and they don't think twice about it. It's if there's any sort of blip in the process, then to keep the process clean, then it goes. Believe me, it was frustrating for all of us, and a lesson for all of us too, in terms of like really verifying sort of where we're at. But you know, it is multi-year data. We can't, and we know where we are relative to the state. In this rate, and I think each of us, there are certain time periods and cohorts, like Ray had said. You know, we also experienced that piece with vaping last year much differently than we are currently. So there are those pieces which you already see. Another piece that we look at with all of it is that the wording of the questions is often quite complex, and there's no accommodation for students in terms of answering these questions. So, because you can't sit there and explain it because it's so confidential. So, within that, there's also students being asked to really answer quite complex questions without necessarily understanding what they are. But the patterns are the patterns, and that's why we look at the patterns and look at the trends, knowing that there's some margin of error in all of it. But, yeah, it was frustrating.
Any other questions? Oh, Maddie.
I would only ask that we get this ahead of time in our packets also. I'd like a chance to spend some time with it before we come to the meeting.
Yeah, at first I was like, is this all the information we got from the survey? I thought they did a lot more than vaping. But clearly I understand now why we got that. But yep, noted. Thanks.
So I just had one last question. This is about the substance abuse counseling that we offer. Is this something that is accessed voluntarily by students? Who are the students who are referred? The students who decide they don't want to take advantage of the counseling, can they? And if they don't, what else do we offer them?
Yeah, so it's, as I said, it's super confidential who works with the substance abuse counselor. It's completely voluntary. And so we don't force any kids to participate in substance abuse counseling. If they refuse, then we can make sure that they're connected to the guidance counselor and the social worker. Because that we can say, you have to see this person, but we really don't. I mean, there's a philosophy that that's not great counseling to do that. But we do.
Mandated counseling.
But we do. Some kids would have a mandatory check-in, that we're just saying, how's it going? I just want eyes on you today to make sure everything's okay. But beyond that, counseling is a very, very personal decision. So we make sure that it's available, that they know that it's there. And then often we're connecting with parents about outside resources and recommending outside counseling as well, because some kids are much more comfortable with that than they are seeing somebody in school.
And are the services advertised only to the students who have been caught or who have problems with substance abuse, or does every student know that that is something that's accessible to them? Because I'm sure there are a lot of students that the administrators or staff don't know, may be struggling, and if they don't have that one-on-one because they got into trouble and they say, by the way, we do have these services, how do the rest of the students find out?
So last year we didn't do a lot of advertising, but we did share with students that the resource was available. Our guidance counselors do a lot of that, of sharing that by word of mouth. But it's not something that we have advertised across the school consistently, partially because it is a limited number of spaces, and but our guidance counselors are, and especially our social worker, she's somebody who talks to kids a lot about the opportunity to see the substance abuse counselor.
Right. My only concern is that the kids who don't go to the social worker because they have no reason to go, because nobody knows and may be struggling, may have an addiction and may need services.
Yeah.
So how do we spread the word so that every student gets to know that there are services available?
I am just now hearing about the social worker. So I mean, not the social worker, the counselor. And I mean, I haven't gone to the social worker, so yeah, it is an interesting question.
Kate.
When a student is utilizing the substance abuse counseling, are parents informed of that?
So they used to not have to be. It was not required, and now it is. It's required. So that is another tough part of that, because some students won't access that if they know that that their parents are aware. But that changed this year.
So why did it change? And whose is the requirement? Is the schools or the counselors?
The counselors.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought of one other question I had thought of earlier, and the questions they asked about alcohol and tobacco and marijuana. The only other drug question really was like, has anybody sold it to you or given it to you on site? I mean, given the whole opioid epidemic we're hearing about, why would they not ask a question about that? Well, okay, is that, I mean...
And then they listed, in the question, it lists like Oxycontin.
Oh, okay.
So underneath prescription drugs, it gave kids examples. But, as Will said, some kids have no idea what that means or the names of those particular prescription drugs. But they did ask that.
Okay. Well, I mean, we don't really care if it's their business, I suppose, as much as are they using, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and, oh no, I use heroin. They didn't ask that. I'm good. Nope, no drugs for me. I mean, you'd think they'd have a question that was a little more open-ended, but because that, I don't know. Laura?
The answers and the high numbers of some of these questions made me think that about how I was sort of surprised to learn this year that the Port Teen Center isn't something that we have anymore. Is that right? It's not utilized anymore. RSU community programs sort of closed it down. That's not true. It's still used.
I think it's maybe used in a different way than it was when it began, but it's still being used.
Still being used, okay.
And I think it's primarily used by our middle school students, right, Ray?
14 traditionally was 6 through 12, but really only middle school kids using it. And then when that started to drop off, they kind of tried to reprogram it, and now it's not a drop-in center. It's where they have programs that kids sign up for and do through that. So the structure of it is definitely completely different. So I could see how someone could say there's not the Port Center anymore, because there's not the drop-in that the middle school kids used to go to.
All the time, yeah. And I guess I just was feeling like, I mean, and if it's not used, of course, it doesn't make sense to have it open for the drop-in, but on a larger scale, as a community member, I feel that we're all responsible for supporting our kids, and I think not just in RSU or like our community programs, I feel like as a community, there's not a lot of programming for kids in that age range. There's not a lot of places for kids to go after school or, things to do. Yeah. So it just, is that?
The Port Teen Center did have high school kids used to go when my son was in high school, but it started to fall off, I think, in his last couple years of high school, and I think it's because of low numbers. But I know that there were high school students who relied on it, and it's the only place they had to go, and they were a freshman or a sophomore and didn't drive and needed to get picked up by a parent. So, I agree. It's something we're lacking in our community, and I don't know what research was done into why there was low participation, but something I think we need.
But I do have to add that at the middle school level, there are activities after school every day. So for kids who need an extended day, there's always something going on at the middle school. Maybe not until 6 p.m., which is when the Port Center used to close, but it's not that at 2:30 everybody needs to clear out the building and the kids don't have a place to go.
And the community
And the library,
does a really
yeah.
nice job with our middle school kids. I mean, they're a huge asset to our middle school.
And they do, and the teens do stay there until 6 p.m. or later. And the librarians can tell you about it.
All right. Thank you. Well, that was more than 20 minutes.
Yep.
You're supposed to shut them off, Jen.
Okay.
No, I know. Yep.
But I do agree with Patty that it's not full time.
Yeah, no, I agree too. District scorecard. Cynthia.
Okay.
Figure out your phone over there?
It wasn't my phone, it's this that I'm, my husband's out, like, stop texting me. Okay, coming on up. Apparently he can't read. Can you not read? Oh, so, good evening. In your packets, Ginny has put in a new scorecard that will replace the 9B. So it says January on the top, the heading. Say January 2020. And then you're going to have a slideshow presentation that's what I'm sharing with you tonight. Need the colored, or you don't need it, but you may want to have it, the colored, oh my word, I'm so sorry, the colored document that says, yes, the one that Maddie's holding up, thank you. Shut off my volume for me till I figure it out. Okay. And I'm just going to be hooking up the presentation so that you can see everything up on the screen. It's going to take me just a second, so if you need to go to the bathroom. Okay, presentation. Okay, so yes. Thank you so much. Okay. So does everybody have what they need? Everything? Okay. All right. So I just wanted to share that in October, I think 9 of you were at the retreat, and we had gone through what was up to date at that time, and I went into such detail with the scorecard, explaining really specific things. Tonight, we're going to do it in a different way. So you've had a chance to already look at the scorecard. The new one that you have tonight only has a couple of minor changes. It doesn't change. It was on grade 3. There was an error, and then a couple of things that were left over that didn't pertain. Some sources that said 2017, just some little italics. So that's the only change from the old one to the new one that you're seeing today. So we're not going to go screen by screen looking at each of those. What I've done is created some graphics that are going to help you, and then put it into more of a context and a focus. And we're going to really do a lot of comparing to state data, so you can really see, well, how do we fit in as a state? So I just wanted to say that. And then you'll also see some disaggregated data for economically disadvantaged and identified disabilities. You see that on your scorecard. We did not include any of this disaggregated data that might be identifying to any individual. So if there's less than 10 students in a subgroup, like for example, we might have grade 7, may not have more than 10 students in identified disabilities, you will see no data there because it's too identifying. People may know the students that are actually in that grouping. And then we also did not include ethnicity in there because when you break that down, most of our predominant, we have predominantly white, but then the other ones are so small that they're identifying as well. So we wouldn't give that information. We do have a different scorecard that the administrators all look at very closely together and at their building levels that has that information so that we can address those if there are particular areas. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out in a big picture way. So tonight we're going to look at our celebrations, and we have a lot of them, so I'm happy to say that. And then we're also going to look at our noticings, which is just an area that we want to pay more particular attention to. Oops. Let's see. Okay. So we decided to chunk this presentation into 3 segments. So the first segment I'm going to be talking about this evening are the MEA results. And what I'd like to do is go through all of the MEA slides and then stop for questions at that point about anything. So if you want to take some notes along the way, if you have any questions, and the administrators are also here in case there's some more specific questions. But if it would help with the flow of, and sometimes your questions might get answered if we just chunk it. So the first chunk will be MEA. The next chunk will be the MAP assessment, which I think I've shared with you before. You probably know it as the NWEA, but that's the vendor. The actual assessment is the MAP assessment, so they're interchangeable. So it's the MAP or NWEA. And then the last section is really the high school and beyond data. So the persistence and going to college and so forth. Okay, so the next slide. I'm working with 2 documents here. Okay. So if you look up on the screen, it's in front of you, but it's also up on the screen. You'll see our reading data, and it's by grade level, left to right. It starts with grade 3, goes through grade 8, and then, of course, you'll see grade 11. In grade 11, they're the SATs. So students take the SATs in April. They get their individual results in July, but then it's converted to an achievement level, which makes that our MEA for grade 11. So it's still the MEA, but it's also the SAT. So there's like 2 purposes for taking that. In here, you're going to notice the pink side is RSU 5, and the darker side is the state. So you can see clearly we are well above the state results across the board in reading. And this slide is the same slide, only it's the math slide. And we are well above the state at all grade levels. And if you look particularly at 7th grade, we are 20 plus points above the state level, percentage points. So that's really pretty significant. The grade 11 data, the result, oh, yeah, I already said that. I was reading my notes and I already said how it's converted. And we're going to come back to that slide in just a minute. This next slide is the same information. We only take our grade, our science state assessment, MEA assessment in grades 5, 8, and 11. And so that's why you just see those 3 segments up there. And we're clearly much stronger than the state again. And if you look at 11th grade, there's a 22-point difference. And that's an increase. We've seen our science scores go up at the high school level. And in a couple of years, this assessment is going to be changing because, as you know, we've adopted the NGSS standards, and some questions are on that assessment that are related to that. But we're doing work now to give professional development to our 6th through 12th grade science teachers around the NGSS, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. The National Science, help me. Next Generation Science Standards, sorry. I'm sorry, I just blanked out for a minute. Thank you. And so there are already some questions on that assessment, but they're going to be converting them over. So in a couple of years, it's all going to be Next Gen Standards questions. So on the next slide, you're going to see our celebrations, and like I said, we have a lot of them. We are above the state average across the board, district-wide, reading, math, and science. At the middle school and the high school, they've increased their science scores over the last 3 years in grades 8 and 11. At Durham, they've increased their reading scores for every cohort and at all grade levels compared to 2018. So that information is actually on that colored sheet, If you go across, the Durham I think is on the top left. If you the reading pieces, and if you go from 18 to 19 across every grade, and if you follow the color cohort from just the last, there's 3 years on there, but just take last year's 2018 to 2019, you can see the percentages go up. The next one, Mass Landing, Pownell, and the middle school, the reading scores increased for all cohorts. Grade 6 district-wide, the math achievement levels increased from 2018. Grade 7 district-wide, the math achievement levels increased significantly, and we have defined throughout this presentation, anytime you see the word significantly, we've defined it as over 10% from 2018. And then grade 6 and 7 reading scores for students with identified disabilities significantly increased from 2018, meaning at least 10% or more. And the last bullet is grade 6 and 8 math scores for students with identified disabilities significantly increased from 2018. Now for our noticings on the MEA. The grade 3 district-wide math achievement dropped from 2018. Grade 8 and 11, the gap between, excuse me a second, the gap between our performance and the state in math decreases. So if I go back to this slide to explain that bullet, this is the math. If you look at grade 8, it's the second one from the far right, you see the gap is decreasing between us and the state. So we'd like to see that gap at least be maintained instead of decreasing, because we want to be further away from the state, and we're getting closer to where the state is from grade 8 to grade 11. So that's that noticing. And then grade 5 science declined significantly from the year prior. And grade 11, the math declined significantly from 2018. So those are 2 more noticings. And so that information is actually on the scorecard. Well, you could see it on the yellow or the RSU, the color document on the bottom. I think it would be the bottom right for the last bullet. You won't see the science on that document. The science would be on the RSU 5 scorecard only. Okay, now for some more fun. The next slide. I've used this slide before, probably a couple of years ago. These are our comparison school districts. So I want to preface this by saying this is not public information yet. It should be public by January 20th. So like that's why there's no like numbers really. My numbers are on my pivot table in the back, but they're not public yet. So I don't anticipate any changes happening with these, but the data was there because we were able to go in and we have to all go in and look at it to make sure everything's all perfect with it, and so that's the data. So the first set is the Yes. Hello. I don't think there are any assessment police, but maybe there are. Okay, so on the left, that cluster is the reading data, the middle is the math, and the far right is the science. And if you look across the legend on the top, I alphabetized them and they're color-coded. So if it's blue in reading, it's the same district. So Brunswick's blue on the far left all the way across. And then I decided to put the RSU 5 to the furthest right, so it's the maroon color. I try to stick with that, our colors. And then the gray, the furthest right, is the state. So we have been maintaining pretty much in the middle of our comparison group for the last 3 years. So we're, the next slide will explain it a little bit more. Let's see. Okay. So this slide shows how our comparison schools ranked in the state, but what you don't see is the ranking because the information is not public yet. This slide is one of my favorite slides, and so it's a little disappointing that I can't give it to you in its entirety yet, but I will fill this in, and it will be shared with you as soon as it's filled in, so by the end of the month. So just to explain, if you look at ELA, that is the order. It's really just taking the last slide and just listing it out in the order, the reading, the math, and the science. So that should be straightforward. So it really shows you, okay, we're fifth, and fourth. In the last couple of years that we've done this, pretty much Falmouth and Yarmouth have toggled 1 and 2, sometimes 3. But what's interesting about this, if you look at the rank section, in the whole state, they put out all of the districts, and then you can sort them. And so just because these are 1 through 8, we're not 1 through 8 in the state. So Cape Elizabeth likely is maybe first in the state in reading. Then it could be Bangor High School could be 2, Baxter, I'm just making this up, but so it could be like Cape Elizabeth is 1, Falmouth is 2, RSU 51 might be 9, Yarmouth might be 10, we might be 20th, Brunswick might be 60th. It goes all the way up to like 200, and I'll give you the total number. So that really tells another picture that even though we might be 5th here, we're really like pretty high up when you compare it to the rest of the state. So to me, this is a nice slide, and I will fill it in for you as soon as the data is available. Let's see. Next slide. Okay. So I hope you had a chance to look at the data ahead of time, because the only new piece you got was really my slide presentation. The scorecard, like I said, was just a couple of minor questions, and I hope this helps us to look at it in a way where are we focusing, where are we in comparison to our cohort and also to the district. Do you have any questions at this time on anything to do with MEAs? Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry too.
She said it's okay. In the data, page 4, grade
Scorecard?
The PSATs.
Yes. So we did.
Is that in the next section?
No, it's not, and I'm glad you brought that up. I
didn't bring it up yet.
Oh.
Shouldn't I say?
Go ahead.
Well, I'm noticing that. Is the test significantly different or something? Because in the state averages, like there's a significant fall off in grade 10. Oh, wait a minute. No, there isn't. Never mind.
Okay.
I'm reading it wrong. What did you think I was going to say?
Oh, I didn't know if you, because it's in the scorecard, why we decided not to put it in, but okay. Okay. But the good news is we have, I believe every student is taking it in grades 10 and 11. So it's really great practice for them, and it should be somewhat of an indicator of how well they do.
I was curious when I read the PSAT and SAT information. So when it says grade 11 PSAT and SAT, those are the same kids taking both tests?
Okay, so here, let me give you the, let me try to put this. So in grade 10, the PSAT is taken in October. So the grade 10 information for 2019, they're the current grade 9, current grade 10 students, right, that we have right now, because we're in 2020. And so the same thing with the grade 11. So those grade 11 students, if you're looking at that the 80%, 80.7%, right, if we're looking on page 4, for those of you that want to find where we are on the PSAT, grade 11, 2019, 80.7% of our students met the benchmark. So those students in April will be taking the actual SAT. So they take it the fall of the same year. Maybe that wasn't your question. So your question is?
So they're different
Am I what?
So grade 11, 2019%, 80.7, right?
Yep.
So those were kids that last year were juniors.
These are our current juniors. Yes.
Our current juniors.
Our current.
They just
No, 2019.
didn't they take it in?
These are.
So like they took it 2 months ago? Or
Yes,
this was
we got the data back.
Okay, so everything else is last year except that.
So for PSAT, this is this year's date. This is like 2 months ago.
Hot off the press.
We got it in December.
Okay. Whereas when I'm looking at grade 11 SATs,
Right.
so their ELA score of
Yeah, that's
I
not
didn't
the
see what
same
it is.
group of kids.
Those are seniors.
Those are seniors. The SATs are seniors.
okay,
I can see why it's confusing. Yep.
because they both say grade 11, but it's not the same grade 11s.
Right. It's
Gotcha.
right. It's because it's when it's administered.
So those grade 10 PSATs, that's 71.9. That's these grade 11.
71.9 are our current grade 10 students. Let's just stay with
I
page
get it.
4.
I follow you.
Do
Yep,
you?
That's because those PSAT ones are just newer. They're newer
Yes.
information.
Yes.
Okay, so they don't align with the date of all the other data we have.
So one way that you could look at it is that the grade 10 students in 2018 who in ELA scored 70.9% on the PSAT
Yeah.
took it the next year, this year, and they scored at 80.7. That's the same cohort of kids.
That's great.
Yes.
So my other MEA question was, when I look at this one, and I mean, who knows, maybe it's a weird day, but there was 3 different, I always look at the same cohort, right? Because you never know, cohort to cohort can change. The Durham grade 7s for 18-19,
Yes.
they went from 57 to 95. Like, what happened?
Okay, so we're
we feed them
on
that
Durham grade 7 math.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So last year, I remember when we looked at that data, that was it's the same. Well, come on.
Do we have more
come on,
kids
come on.
take the test, or?
No.
So I'm looking at, reading.
Oh, okay.
So-
You're looking
Sorry.
at reading. Okay.
Oh, okay. I thought
yeah.
you were looking
sorry,
at
math was 7th to 8th, right? 7th
Right.
grade was 34 and 8th was 68. I mean, they doubled.
Right.
And in reading, 6 to 7 went from 57 to 95. And then down in Pownell, not quite as extreme, but they went in the 3rd to 4th grade, they went from 43 to 70. I mean, did we just chalk that up to, wow, I mean, or fantastic teaching? Like, what?
I'm going to let the principals speak to that specifically.
Yeah, we tend to think it's a good day to go buy a lottery ticket, to be perfectly honest with you.
Too bad
Yeah.
you don't have the data for another 9 months.
Yeah, that's right. So I can't, obviously, that stuck out to us too. Obviously, that reading score, because it's a dramatic piece, and it really meant that only 2 students didn't meet or exceed when you look at our numbers. So other than making sure it's accurate, we look at what possibilities are there. There's no necessarily, we can't guarantee this is why, but some of the things that were different last year from the year previously, for example, yes, there was a new teacher in that role. Also, if you may or may not recall, but we'd added a half-time RTI teacher to literacy for grades 5 through 8 that started last year. We added district-wide across the middle schools a literacy coach with Kim Copperwaith's work. And so, you know, there certainly has been some investment in programming and supports for both teachers and students that has taken place that could well have contributed to that. But, you know, you wouldn't usually... You couldn't say, okay, let's add that to every level and we'll get the same result. So it's obviously not a hard and fast correlation, but those are the factors that are certainly different from what they were previously.
And I'm certainly glad to see that all those jumps were jumps up and not the other way.
Right, right.
And I would say as far as ours, we have to be really careful because it's such a small sample size. So for example, last year we had 5 move-in students into the 5th grade. So when you look at that, like math data from 4th to 5th, you think, oh, what happened? Well, there are 5 students who came in to a group of 17. So one of the ways that we use this data is to really look at, does this state and national data sort of match what we're seeing with our kids? Are we intervening with the kids that aren't meeting the standard? Are we identifying the students that need acceleration? You know, like, does this, it needs to be more personalized at Pownell because the sample size is so small. So we're really looking at it sort of student by student and kind of seeing, what trends are we seeing at that level, Valley?
Although I would say that applies to every school, no matter what the size.
Right.
And my question was, we see the aggregate data per grade, but are the principals disaggregating the data by quartile? So we know if we see a jump, is it that the lowest performing group is really improving? But despite that, do we see that maybe the high performing group is dropping in performance? So it's really helpful to see the numbers in the bigger picture, but as far as action steps and what you do with the data, unless you disaggregate it by quartile, it's really difficult to see where you are doing well, where you're not. And I'm hoping that all of the principals are actually doing that.
So we're doing it at the student level. We don't even need to go in the quartile level. It's really like who's making progress over time. Because the other thing you need to think about is if somebody's a 349, they're a 1. If they're a 351, they're a 2. So you really also have to look in at the scaled scores around, like how close were they to the cut points. And so what I think's happened in all schools is in the PLCs, we've really dug into like which part of the test are they, performing well in, and which part of the test do we seem to see a trend where we could bolster the instruction. We really look at this as feedback to us around what we're doing. So,
which is good, because I think that's the best use of these scores. It's great to see how we stack up against other people, but really, the best use of this information is that, I think.
Right. I think we also, as a district, and when you look at our new strategic plan, we take kind of a conservative, we look at this as feedback. It's important to us, but I think we've taken a stance of not doing a lot of tests. We don't want to be teaching to the test. We want the test to reflect, is our curriculum doing what we think is in our kids' best interests, which is why sort of looking at where we are in relation to the state, in relation to our cohorts, how is what we're providing for our kids supporting them without sort of overreacting to the information. David Silvernail's done a lot of work at the state around looking at districts that are sort of value added, sort of high performing. It's kind of old stuff now, but that data was always around, are we closing the gap as kids go along the way? Is there value in being in RSU 5? And I think those are some of the questions, some of the conversations we're having where kids are doing well. So,
everybody good on MEAs?
So I have questions that are about all the tests, trends that I see that flow through one test to the other. Are we going to ask those questions later? Are you going to present some of the other tests right now?
You mean in terms of the MAP assessment?
NWAs, yeah.
So maybe after that piece is done for the comparison purpose? Yeah. And I just wanted to add that each school has as a scorecard for their own schools as well. So it gives them, but then they also go on the site and they can pull it down by the student level. They can manipulate it and all of that. So they're doing that work. They are doing that work in their building. And they'll do it in the way that best fits the needs of their buildings and where their focus is, where their goals are once they've decided. Some of the goals have even been set for our title funding. We have some Title I schools, and they're setting goals based on some of this data at that level too. And so they're doing it. It's not like a cookie cutter way. It's what's their best for their buildings.
I think Kate had a question before we move on.
I was just curious, Cynthia or Jen, what your thoughts are about what's going on in the math at the high school from 10th to 11th, and then just 11th grade year over year.
I didn't hear the end of your question, Kate.
So, for instance, I'm looking at the grade 10 PSAT math for 2018 at 51.5%, and then the grade 11 PSAT in 2019 at 41.2%, and then the 2018-19 SAT versus the 2018-19 SAT. And what you're thinking is, am I reading that right? It went from 54.4% to 41.3%. Do you have any theories on what might be going on there, or plan of attack for that?
Yep, and so I think there's a couple of different things. One is that the cohort plays a role in that, of the group of students who that was in 2017-18, definitely played a part in that. That also, is the younger grades is where we have implemented the Big Ideas program, and so we're hoping to see that there will be an impact, a significant impact of that. So our current 11th graders are the students who have been, if they've been in Algebra 1 and then Geometry and Algebra 2, that they will be the first group of kids who have gone through the Big Ideas program. So we're hoping that that will make an impact. Our math team at the high school has gained some, what I think is incredible momentum in the work that they've been doing with the coach. At this time, we didn't have our math coach in place. So Nate Garnett has done intense work with our math team. And I think that we have built a lot of momentum 6 through 12. So the 6 through 8 math teachers are sharing their experience of what they've been doing with the Big Ideas program. And so I think that all of those things are hopefully going to help with that data.
I'd also like to add that when this test was taken, it used to be for our lowest students, when they entered 9th grade, they took a Part 1 Algebra 1 class and then a Part 2, so they didn't get to the Algebra 2 before they took the SAT. Jen and Charlie have changed that, and so now it's every day. So for our lowest kids, they're taking that same class every day, as opposed to stretching it over 2 years. So next year, our current sophomores, we should start seeing a difference on the test results as well. I think that will help.
Okay, I think we're done with MEA, with the caveat that we can make correlations later.
Oops, signed out. Okay, here we go. So now we'll continue with our second segment. Just as a reminder, we began our spring to spring testing cycle in FY 2018, which is the 2017-18 school year. It's administered in grades 2, in the spring of grade 2 all the way through grade 10. And it is aligned with our standards, Common Core standards. Let's see. It's important to know that this assessment also is normed. It's nationally normed, so this is how it's a little bit different. For this presentation, there's an achievement level and there's a growth level, where really the benefit of this assessment is to look at our student growth, and that's what the presentation will focus on tonight. Okay, let's see. So this is a slide that shows you our spring to spring reading growth from the spring of 2018 to 2019 by grade level. And as a reminder, when you're looking at the blue column and the diamond indicates what our projected growth should be. So they look at, thousands and thousands and thousands of students that have created the norms across the country. So this is based on when you take the test during the year. This is what is projected to be your growth. So where that diamond is. So if you look at grade 3, it's 10 point, let's say 3. And so if the blue graph, that is how our kids actually perform, is above, then that's a celebration. So what you're looking for at each level is that the diamond is inside of that blue graph. And so that is a beautiful slide right there. So it shows that we're doing well with our TC work on grades 3 through 8. We've recently, I think Ray talked about this earlier, or I'm not sure if it's Ray or Will, but mentioned that we have coaching with Kim Copperthwaite district-wide, so we've added that. And so we feel like the decisions that we've made have really helped with this. And so, okay. And yeah, so that's that. Okay, so here are the celebrations and noticings for our MAP growth. At each grade level, the growth is at its expected level of between 50 to 60%. All growth, grades 3 through 10, even though we give it in grade 2, you're looking for the growth from the end of grade 2 to grade 3, so that's why we give it in grade 2, is within the expected range. Grade 7 exceeded this range with 65%. We have much stronger participation in grades 9 through 10. I remember standing at a board meeting at least a couple of years ago, and it was very, very low numbers. And so Jen has done a great job of setting it up to make it successful and structuring it. And she even made a change this year in the structure to ensure that the participation rate was really strong, and it is. Economically disadvantaged, 5 out of 8 of the grade levels their test exceeded the district percent. Students with identified disabilities in reading in grade 3 and grades 5 through 10 increased significantly, which remember we used the definition of 10% or more from 2018. And then our noticing is that the economically disadvantaged subgroup at grade 4 was trending down over the last 3 years. And this is all for reading. Okay. All right. So in math, it's the same idea. You'll notice grade 3, the diamond is above what our growth actually was. Everywhere else, it's a nice celebration. And we'll go right to the celebrations on this page. All growth, grades 3 through 10, are within the 50 to 60 oops. Was that slide not right? Should say grade 3. Oh, yes, okay. Oh, okay. Within the 50 to 60% range, a much stronger participation again in 9 through 10. Students with identified disabilities, grade 6, increase growth significantly from 2018. Our noticing is the students with disabilities in grades 3 and 4 were significantly below our expected growth. And the economically disadvantaged at the high school is trending down. Questions?
Cynthia, can you explain on the slide 13, the 4th bullet?
13?
Yep. The 4th bullet, economically disadvantaged.
Okay.
5 out of the 8 grades tested exceeded the district percent.
Okay. So if you go to
that, yeah, which
I'm going
should
to
I look
the
at?
scorecard.
Yep.
And you want to go to the growth, which is on pages 12. So if you look at, let me just do some double count here. Okay, so if you look at this is the reading.
I think I see it now. I didn't realize it was the growth
Yes,
that you
this
were.
is all about.
Yeah,
Yes.
you meant the achievement level.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Or maybe you want to explain it if other people were wondering too. But
Well, we're expecting them to be 50 to 60%, and if it's below that percentage,
I see now that I think the district percentage was actually lower than the economically disadvantaged percentage in the growth,
Right.
spring to spring.
And that's
impressive.
usually a subgroup that you worry about underperforming.
Yep.
So that's why that was a celebration here.
Cynthia, sounds like grades 6, 7, and 8 are doing fantastic work, and there are trends of increasing results throughout the different tests, but the reverse seems to be happening in grades 3 through 5. What is going on in grades 3 through 5? They were performing really well not that long ago, and now all of a sudden we're seeing that
the growth.
it's the group that has most decreases in both reading and math throughout the MAP and the MEA.
So just to clarify, are you asking the question specific to the MEA?
I'm seeing, for example, that in 3, 4, and 5, there are consistent decreases in all the grades, in all the tests. And then for 3, 4, and 5, again, and the MAP growth in both reading and math seems to be trending down. There seems to be a lot of trending down throughout those 3 grades, I mean, throughout the district.
So
and throughout the tests.
So the area that jumped out to us collectively, like most notably, was third grade math. And we've had some conversations about hypotheses about what we think that is, and it's an area that needs attention. When we look at cohort data, so looking at the same group of students year over year, they're generally speaking, things are not trending down. They're either flat or seeing increases. I haven't looked at cohort data district-wide from NWA. I mean, I can do it right here if that's helpful. So I don't land at the same conclusion, I guess, as my initial response, that we're seeing trends down as much as we're not seeing the acceleration of growth that we've seen at the middle school.
We're doing the same programming. We have the same TC support for the teachers. So is there a reason why it may be trending up quicker at the middle school than the higher elementary?
You know, I would have to answer that question, and the Will and Ray are welcome to jump up, but I would be curious, I think, to draw a conclusion from that, what I'd want to look at is the gap between the state and us. So Cynthia's actually going to, I think that slide is several slides later, but looking at, like, where's the gap? So if we look at the gap between the state performance and our performance, it might be 11 or 12 points in third grade, and it grows consistently. So we start slightly ahead of the state, and actually that continues to grow for the duration until about 8th grade. And depending on the year, some years at 7th grade, but typically at the end of middle school, you start to see a shift. So I think one thing I'd caution you on is looking purely at number, at the proficiency number, because another way to look at it is, like, if 40% of kids in the state were proficient, but 60% in, you know what I mean? And so this is another way to look at that. And I think one of the questions, like I said, third grade math is definitely an area that both in my building and district-wide, we've had some questions about. And what's fascinating, too, is when you see a trend across schools, like, we have the luxury then of being able to say, like, you know, I can kind of reflect on, like, what are my hypotheses about mass landing, but the great thing is we get to reflect together when it's a district, you know, piece of data. But the other question is at the other end of the continuum is, like, why do we see, so I would say generally speaking, we're successful with our kids 3 through 7, 8, and then that gap starts to close, right? So a worthy question, but that's kind of another way to look at it, is against that state data.
Yeah.
And it's right up there. We already did that slide. That's the
One other thing to keep in mind is, you know, the teacher's college work and the implementation of the units of study, we're farther in at the elementary school. So I haven't, it outlasts my tenure in the district, so I couldn't speak. And I don't know that the district honestly was looking at that data. Is when you initially adopt a curriculum, if you're going to get some boost suddenly by having like vertical alignment, that piece has passed. It was the middle school, that middle school adoption and the change in the math curriculum is a newer piece. So that may also play into it.
Mm-hmm. Other ideas? Thank you. They just left you up there, Emily.
This slide, I went back to this slide, illustrates what she was trying to say. If you look, we're trending up in reading all the way through 7th grade. So I think that's the slide that she was trying to. Yep.
I would just say the one other thing is I think part of the reason at the elementary grades last year we were asking for the RTIB support is we are seeing more kids come with more significant needs. And like I know for my building, I wasn't able to offer math RTI support last year because those resources had to go to a couple of kids with significant behavioral needs. So thank you for that RTIB support because I think that benefits all kids. But that was a new resource that isn't reflected in this data.
One of the sessions that I went to at the conference I spoke briefly about was about equity gaps, and USM gave this presentation, and they have an equity audit available, and I'm bringing this up as a reflection on the noticings in both math and reading where economically disadvantaged students in particular grades, I think it's the high school for math and it's 4th grade for reading, that was a noticing that there's it's falling off there. So I'm wondering if we're making use of that. That's a free resource from USM that helps, plugging in this. They actually have all the data already, so you can go to this resource and they will have our district data, and it can help us to identify structural to think about possible structural barriers that may exist in the district that may be causes, not just looking at the teachers necessary, or the cohort, but, what might be some out of the box thinking about changes that we could make. So I would just request that that's a resource that we make use of. It's at usm.edu/EEMS is where that exists.
The last segment is about the advanced or the high school level and beyond. And these slides are actually just screenshotted right from your scorecard. This slide shows 8 years of data at the high school regarding advanced placement classes. The AP classes provide a great learning and the ability to experience a high level of rigor of college classes. And if you'll notice, the big highlight that stands out to me is if you look at the far right column, 2018-19, that first line that talks about the total number of students enrolled in advanced placement courses. 133, that is pretty phenomenal. When you look back when Becky and I first came, it was 70, so it's kind of doubled in the last 3 years. And so I think that's pretty awesome that our kids are being exposed to this level of academic work. And this data also is used in the U.S. News Best High Schools. They look at this information and you get some point value for this. So this is great for us. And the next slide is our graduation cohort. So you'll see that this last year our certified percentage of students graduating is 93.2, and that is it's gone down a little bit, and we have a dropout prevention committee that meets regularly to look at students who are at risk. We meet monthly, and it's a very active committee, and I'm very proud to say there's been a lot of great work and good ideas that have come out of that, providing mentors, adult mentors from the community to help support students, and we're working on going down to the lower levels, the middle levels. Our guidance counselors are actively involved, our administrators are actively involved in that too. So we're really proud of the work that we've been doing. Traditionally, 2 years ago and prior to that, it met once a year because that's all that's required. But we've taken a very active role, and Beth is on that committee with us. And the next slide. This shows the post-secondary readiness and success. So these next two slides are just going to show you who enters school, college immediately after graduating. So if you look at the far right, it's 75 students out of 110 in the class of 2018. And then I'm just going to go to the next slide. The next slide shows the second year. It shows the percentage of students who went to college the first year returning for a second year. So the next graphic really tells the story. So the picture tells the story. And so I use the class of 2016 because we have the 2-year data for this. If you look at when those students entered grade 9 in the fall of 2012, that's the full amount, right? There's 10 bodies there representing the full class. And then the graduation in June, like I just showed you, we talked about that graduation rate being 93-point-something%. So I made the little last body, like the dark color is like the 3% that goes there. So it's just a nice way to pictorially see it. Then out of the next line shows those entering college from that group, the fall of 2016. And that number is 63%. And then the last row shows those who return to college for year 2 is 56.9%. So that's pretty great numbers that they continued to, pretty high number continued to go to college for a second year. Yes. Oh.
If we have a student graduating and they're accepted to college, but they're doing some program, a gap year or something, but they plan to go to college, do we still
So it's not included in this. However, we do have that information. The National Clearinghouse document that I have, it's very extensive, and it has these graphics that show who went right away, and then it'll go that holds that class to the next year, and it does it for every year, and it shows, and I can show it to you. But the next year they'll say one of the colored bands is who just started school. So they may not have gone the first year.
I just don't want it to look like it's a ding just because we have a kid that's doing a less traditional path.
No, the graphics I showed you are just straightforward like that, but I could create another graphic to show, and they're kind of fascinating, that would show you, I could just screenshot the graphics they have. It's from the National Clearinghouse, and it's very fascinating. Like in some of them, it takes them 5 or 6 years to graduate. So it goes out 6 or 7 years, not for this class because they're just 2 years out. But the data I have is from 2011 and the 2012. So in 2011-12, from my memory, about 52% of the classes graduate.
And I would also say, trade school is
within
something
6
else.
years.
So we should consider, college not being the only positive.
Yeah. Well, if you look back at the slide, here's what it includes. Like, let's pick this one. So it includes whether they're public or private, a 4-year or a 2-year, and in-state and out-of-state. So it doesn't break it down by military or, these are the categories. Questions on readiness? Okay.
Jen.
That is my question about the slide that you just had that said it was 4-year, 2-year. Are we doing a disservice by not identifying where
where everyone's going. I mean, I think that's a real issue that we're having with, the vocational schools, like numbers dropping in vocational schools, and that we're not identifying and celebrating, because that's the word that we used tonight, where all kids are going. I mean, if a student's going to a vocational program, going to, spa tech to train for, becoming a hairdresser, like, are we collecting that data?
I'm going to ask Jen. I don't know of any for like the example you just gave.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure if you're aware.
Yeah, so we collect the data from every senior. One of the hard things, if seniors are watching this, is that they don't all fill out the survey to tell us what they're doing.
Right.
But our guidance counselors do an exceptional job of trying to harass them. So we do try to track where every single student is going. One of the reasons is because at our final awards night, every student receives something who's moving on somewhere.
Right.
And so we do track where they're going, but it hasn't been a part of the scorecard.
I mean, I think that would be a great thing to just share with the board. It doesn't have to necessarily be a part, but I think that would be a really nice kind of to get an idea of, if it's 50, I think it was like 52% go to a second year, like where's everybody else, going?
So
think
that
that-
parents' basement.
Yeah. That data is harder to track.
Well, even just as of
Sure.
of graduation.
The graduation
Not 2 years down
information,
the road.
we can get that easily. So that could certainly be something that we share with the board.
But I do believe that the story of who persists, that's really hard to track in the way that you're saying, because, I mean, I think it's easy at graduation time to say, yes, I'm going into the military, or yes, I'm taking a gap year, or to go explore Europe. But I think to then follow through in September to say, did we really do that? I mean, it would be internal data that we don't have anything to compare it to, which this is a way of tracking it to see how we're comparing, nationwide.
But I think the
and
more important
internally,
thing is
but-
not just the college piece, right? I mean,
Yes,
we're hearing
I know.
over and over again
Yes,
that college, secondary education is what's critical, not going to get a bachelor's degree, right? So some
Correct.
form of training or career readiness, I mean, those are what's important. So when we don't include those in the statistics, I think we do ourselves a disservice, because it doesn't look like it's as important if it didn't make it on the chart as success.
Well, and I also think that it could give us a lot of information on to dictate what we do in the future. Like if you have a 10% of your kids going into a vocational training program, like is that reflected in, does 10% of our population go to the vocational school? We do a lot of college exploration in high school. We don't do as much career and kind of life exploration, so that might help drive what you do here at the high school to expose kids to all the available things they could move on to. Pat.
One of the challenges with that is that where we get this data from is the National Clearinghouse of Data, and so some place like Spa Tech, they don't track that same, they're not connected in the same way, and so it would be hard for us as a district to track that over time. We certainly can look at where kids, as Dr. Foley said, where kids say they're going to go. That's what we can look at. So, and I will say that we are, in the last 3 years, have definitely had a more emphasis on career exploration through the job fairs that we're doing. We're doing them earlier in the year so that students can think about them for the summer. And then we do a job fair more for kind of temporary jobs, and then we have a career fair in addition to that. And then this year, all of the seniors during the day of PSATs had a financial fitness fair, they call it. And so that's where they were exploring different careers and the salary you might make, and then the budget from there and things like that. So we're trying to add more and more programs like that.
Jen, you do have the information about, at some point, I don't know whether it's done at like a senior night or what, about where every student is planning to go, because I feel like I've seen that.
On the graduation program, we put that.
So you could, I mean, we do we keep the old programs? I mean, we could probably pull 5 years worth of data.
Yes, yeah, we
Okay.
definitely could.
Great.
So I have a question about what is meant by post-secondary education. That means just
2 and 4 year
or
college.
community college, but it doesn't include anything technical,
Sounds like no.
even though
I-
they're 2-year technical programs.
Because I'm not sure they report to the clearinghouse.
Okay. And I do have to say, I was at that school fair. I mean, that career and job fair. It was excellent. They did a great job.
And I think they've even done them in the middle schools, which my kid came home with a list of things like, I want to do this job. You know how much they make? Great. That's it, Cynthia?
Yes.
Thank
well,
you.
for now, I'll be back.
Or any other questions?
So I had a
Oh, yeah.
final question.
Oh.
So now that we have all this data, how do we use it? I know that each principal is disaggregating the data, but as far as the trends, where
Well,
are we focusing on resources?
I think that we addressed it along the way. I mean, each individual, we talk about it together as an administrative team. Individual principals talk about it with their leadership teams and their schools in whatever way they see is the best. They make and set goals. They request in their budget, if needed, resources would help with any of those issues. So it's really constantly what our work is.
So I was thinking, I think you wait 2 weeks, we're going to start hearing some of this same feedback. And, remember when you saw that trend? This is what this is for. I mean, hopefully we see that.
I'm hoping we do, yeah.
We have, one of the things when we get to the goal updates was we've talked about creating a more formalized protocol, and we are leaning towards doing this presentation at this time of the year right before budget so that the data will be fresh in your mind when we go into the budget. But I would also emphasize what Cynthia said. I feel like the data is being used constantly in different ways to look at, where are the needs, where we've invested pretty heavily in the district in coaches, and it's not about, every teacher is going to see the coach once a year. It's about where do we need the coaches and what is the professional development they need to be doing. So we're strategic about how we use them based upon the data that we see.
So one question about the timing of defining goals. We hear about the goals at the beginning of the year because those are defined over the summer, but we don't have this information available until December. So if there are any big gaps that are identified as a result of the new data, do the goals get revised at the school levels, or is there any way to reflect the data and the needs that it may exemplify without having to wait until next summer when we have new
So one of the
goals?
things that I think you heard me say 3.5 years ago was we don't have
We remember that, yeah.
we don't have good data over time, right? That it's, you had looked at data on a kind of a yearly basis, but to me it's not about what is the data that we got in December. It's really about what is the trend over time. And I can't think of a time where we went back since I've been here and revised a goal, but we've definitely looked at the data and maybe all of a sudden the focus has shifted with the coaches or something like that. But I think the goals are broader than that, than any one singular data point.
Speaking of goals.
Okay, so I'm doing this way, especially for Valley. So in your packet, you received the goals update, and I'm sure you've all read and reviewed them extensively. So I am going to kind of not read every bullet, but I'm going to kind of tell you overall where I think we are with each goal. So on strategic goal 1, with the students experiencing a joyful learning climate, we talked about strengthening and aligning all our social emotional development systems, and I'm happy to report that I feel like we're making good progress there, and that this goal should be completed by the end of the year, and in 2 weeks during the upcoming budget, you will see a focus on this area. The second goal is around the meaningful student-centered learning. And our objective for this year was to review, research, and explore options for the implementation of student-centered instructional practices. We have been working on the definition, like what does that really mean in RSU 5. We have a strong draft definition of that, but it hasn't been finalized, but we're nearing completion of that. And then once we have that finalized, our plan is to then put that out there and meet and decide how to best gather that information of what we're currently doing. We hope to have that completed by the end of the year. We still think we can reach that goal. The next goal we've made really, I think, great progress on. That's around still the student-centered learning, but we had talked about the need to provide strong support for professional practices that foster collaboration and staff voice and strengthen instruction. And I feel like we've worked extensively on this beginning last summer, where the principals met together, and we have that wonderful additional time in the new contract with 18 hours more of professional learning time on Wednesdays, and we've taken the input from the staff and we're providing more what I would call collegial, collaborative planning time. And we also meet with the association monthly, so that if they're hearing anything about they don't feel like we're going in the right direction or providing enough staff input, we can adjust with that. So I feel like that's always ongoing, but I also think we're near completion with our steps on that one.
If he can leave.
No. Oh,
Oh,
please,
yes,
miss.
yeah.
No, I was going to just say that's a perfect segue for a pitch that if you want to find out a bit more about that, next Wednesday's staff meeting out at Durham is some of the collaborative work we're doing between Durham and Pownell, and that's an invitation to board members if you'd like to come over. We'll be meeting at DCS at 3:30, probably about 45 minutes. Opportunity to hear about that sort of collaborative planning and responsive planning with teachers, and opportunity to sort of push into a couple of the different teacher groups that are meeting, if that's of interest to you.
Thanks for that reminder.
Make such unsubtle.
Yeah.
Yeah, have you
Yeah.
seen my hat anywhere?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then I talked a little bit about the protocol just a few minutes ago. Cynthia and I are working on that draft protocol. We really want to formalize when we're looking at data, and I see us being able to complete that by the end of the year. Then our next goal, our goal 3, with the partnerships, expand avenues used to proactively distribute information about the schools and seek feedback. We have done some things. We keep looking at the budget brochure. We've made the revisions for this current year. That we received some feedback from the town leadership. We're going to be making some upgrades on our budget sheet to make it clear. Our PBE continues to focus on that. But I think we still, that's always ongoing, and I think we have a ways to go. We have a strategic communications coming up on Friday, and I think this will be part of our discussion. Then our next goal is to engage all RSU 5 learners in community-based learning, both in the classroom and out in the community. We expect to begin that before the end of the year, but we have not really begun that one. We decided to start with the social emotional because we felt like there could be a budget request around that one, and the student-centered learning. So those really have been where our focus has been this fall. And then the next one is really around the finance, facilities, transportation with the existing capital improvement. Dennis has been meeting with each of the principals to look at some long-term planning. You requested a workshop on our timeline. We had identified that we would be done with this by December, but there's been a request to kind of move that up, so we're hoping to have something probably in April or May, and Dennis is working with each of the principals on that, so we've made some good progress on that. And then our next goal was attracting and retaining highly effective staff. I feel like this is, almost completed, although again, that's an ongoing goal. There's always more that we can do. But we've done a lot of work around the mentor system that's now required by the state, and we feel like that's being successfully implemented at the moment. And then last was just around transportation, and we're looking to return to half-day pre-K at Moore Street and Pownell. You'll be hearing about some of this during the budget presentation, and we are looking at options to create that late bus, so I think we'll easily have that completed by the end of the year. And that completes my update, and I'm open to questions.
Maddie.
Just a request on goal 3 around school parent community communication.
Yes.
Is some proactive communication around the budget meeting on May 27th, which I think is in Durham this year. Just remembering last year and how attendance had really fallen off, and just as much as we can engage people and inviting them to come out and participate in their right to vote.
Yeah, well, we can talk about that at our strategic communications on Friday. I think we're very open to whoever has a suggestion. I think we try hard. Social media. Yes. Yeah.
Other comments, questions on the goals? Sounds like you guys are making good progress.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for all the great work and all the progress. And I just wanted to point out that the second part of the goal about students regularly engage in meaningful student-centered learning. That's great that you're making progress on that one. Based on the survey from the community, that was the top goal that people were asking for.
Yes.
So that's one that really pay close attention to, because that's what people are asking for and expecting to see. And then the one that follows that about staff voice, as it relates to PD, sounds like a lot of progress has been made. But I also wanted to point out that the inclusion of the staff voice wasn't strictly related to professional development, but the survey results basically were alluding to the fact that staff voice needs to be included in all sorts of decisions across the board, including professional development.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, board comments and committee reports. Finance committee.
We met once in December, and again tonight we're still working on running the various different cost sharing analysis that the board have asked us to do, and preparing handouts for what we hope to be the next board meeting. We're going to meet again next Tuesday as well to try to finalize those. And we're also starting to, it doesn't say this on here, but we are also starting to pull back in our normal work plan that the finance committee undergoes, so that there's usually other stuff we work on throughout the year other than just cost sharing, and we haven't been really looking at any of that in the last year or so. So we're gonna put some more of those items onto try to fit those into the next few agendas for our finance committee.
Thank you. Policy committee, Candy.
Yes, I'll do this very quickly because then Cynthia's going to get up again. As you can see from your yellow sheet, that we did a long list of policies we looked at, several which had no changes recommended, or it might have had one word shall instead of should, something like that, that doesn't need to come to you. And then there were 4 there were changes. Reporting to the public, we crossed out some long lists of requirements for reporting and said we'd just follow law, and Cynthia will talk to you about that. And the board conflict of interest added something about procurement and contractor to make sure that wasn't that was in there in terms of conflict of interest. And in the board of directors officers, there's something that Cynthia explained about the responsibilities for the vice chair and the teacher and educational technician substitute policy. You'll see that you're going to see that there's some financial there in an exhibit about the amounts of money, and that there was one policy recommended for rescinding it because everything in that is in another policy. So Cynthia will talk to you about those. Oh, and this was our December meeting. We also met last Friday, so you got a lot more coming to you next time.
We look forward to it, Candy.
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you.
So just to segue on what Candy said, or continue on what Candy was saying, the first policy before you, AEC, accountability reporting to the public. I just want to report out in D. I just want to give you a couple piece of information. The district report card, that's on page 2. It's posted to by December 31st annually on the state website. And that website is the Essa Dashboard. That's where I had gone on and gotten that sneak peek for that graphic. It's if you go on it, you can get on it, and there's a link on our website, and we're required to put it on. So that's how that public information is out there. You'll get last year's data. This is a little photocopy of the new data, but it's not public yet. But so what it includes is all of the things that are required by law, right? The demographics, the academic performance, graduation rate, post-secondary enrollment, just like you saw in the scorecard. So I just wanted to give you that information. And the website is maine.gov/DOE/dashboard#. So that is linked on our website, and if you want the link, I can send that to you as well. That's public information. So all we're asking to do is everything that's struck out below D, some of that doesn't apply anymore, and so basically to keep this document usable, and so you don't have to come back anytime there's a change, is just to say that statement. We actually moved this statement up at the end of the paragraph D. It says that was required by federal law, and then there was that list. We just changed it and moved it up at the end of paragraph D. The district report card shall contain all the required components as required by federal law. So that's the only change there. The next one is policy Board of Directors Conflict of Interest, BCB. The only, as Candy said, the only addition to that policy is on the bottom of page 1 of 3, and that's that code of conduct for federally funded projects. If you remember when I first came and we had our audit for our title audit, we didn't have this policy, and it was a required policy. So the policy, we do have the policy, and it's DJH, purchasing and contracting. So if there's a conflict of interest, if your husband works for a contractor and that kind of thing. So that's what that addresses. So that paragraph is in the MSMA sample, and so we added it there. And then at the top, we just kind of changed it to RSU 5 instead of singling out each of the towns. And then in the center, in the center, we just changed things like his, her to there, and then really took what was B and broke that into 2, and just so that there's separated out and it's more clear. And
I think Susanna has a quick question on that one.
oh, I'm sorry.
Susanna.
Sorry, just a quick
Hi.
question.
Yes.
On the conflict of interest.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, some of these might be quite clear as to whether a conflict of interest exists, but wondering if it maybe not really clear, somebody owning a company, for instance, who is to ascertain whether a conflict of interest exists, and also if an individual, if it is established that a conflict does exist or it's hard to disprove an appearance of a conflict of interest, whether that individual has information that may be relevant moving forward, if that information is allowed to be made public, and what the policy is around that.
So the policy that you're referring to in your first question, I believe, is the DJH, right?
Where's
so?
But we don't have that here, right?
You don't have that
Yeah.
here, and I don't have it memorized, but it's on
Okay.
our website, and all of the all our policies are. And so I can quickly look at it. If you like. So there's a part about the conflict of interest, and it specifically defines that, and then it says the conflict of interest disclosure. So can you tell me specifically what your question is about?
I think it's just who is to ascertain whether a conflict of interest actually exists. So if somebody in maybe a more vague situation in which they're not certain whether a conflict exists or not, or when you speak, there's the part here about the appearance of a conflict of interest. So if somebody says that maybe this looks a little bit fishy, either identifying it in respect to themselves or somebody else,
So
where does that decision get made?
Okay, so for the one about the contracting, the paragraph says no employee, at RSU number 5, which includes the board because we're all employees, shall participate in the selection, award, or administration of a contract supported by federal funds or in any other transaction in which the school unit is a party if he or she has a real or apparent conflict of interest in the transaction. So it's pretty clearly spelled out, and if somebody brings it forward, then you would address it and go to the policy. Just like with any policy, sometimes we don't know there's a violation until...
Right. And the second part being, if that person has valuable information, are they allowed to share it?
If which person?
So if somebody with an established conflict of interest has information that can be relevant for a project moving forward but should not have a vote on the project, is that person allowed to publicly or privately put forth that information?
I would say yes. Because to me, it's more the voting where you would be abstaining.
But you have to disclose.
But you would want you would want to disclose it, and you know.
So if you look at the center, it says make full full disclosure of their interest prior to initiating any board discussion. So say something came to the board, you'd have to say that right up front, like at the beginning, and then B. It says abstain from attempting to influence the decision. So there'd have to be some thought put into what is said about whether that's influencing the decision. And then you would abstain from voting or negotiating that. Is that clear? Does that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's close enough. Okay, thank you.
Any more on that one?
So I have... and it may just be, but to me it seems a little confusing as to what we mean by conflict of interest. When I read this once, I think, okay, it's conflict of interest is only when there's a negotiation or award or contract being discussed. But then there are other more general descriptions of conflict of interest. For example, a board member has a financial interest, which could be or not be related to a contract or award or negotiation. So it's unclear to me whether this will be easily understood to the general public. It's not to me.
So if you look at the second paragraph, maybe that's helpful. A conflict of interest may arise when there is an incompatibility between a board member's personal interest and his or her responsibilities as an elected official in a matter proposed or pending before the board. So it's sort of a generalized statement. Board members have a legal and ethical responsibility to avoid not only the conflict of interest, but the appearance of it.
Okay, so where I get stumped a little bit is in number C, where it says abstain from voting and from the negotiation or award of any contract, but it doesn't say abstain from voting or from, I guess, or from voting for issues that do not involve negotiation or award or contract. Do you follow what I mean?
Not quite.
It sounds like if we had some more general language, it might satisfy, because the specificity of saying any contract almost makes it sound like it only pertains to contracts. Right. So maybe if we said a contract, for example, or that would be one thing to address that, but I'm also thinking maybe at the end of the second paragraph, a sentence that would say something like, the following paragraphs describe instances of potential conflicts of interest.
What if we said abstain from voting and from the negotiation or award, and from negotiation of an award or any contract?
The sentence makes it sound like it's only about contracts.
Or awards.
Or awards, where there can be more, there could be more general situations that have financial implications that aren't related to contracts or awards.
Exactly.
I was thinking of award would be that general word, but
award, right?
Because it's an award of some sort, right? But
an awarding of monetary value, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether word crafting it now is the solution, but maybe before the second read, you guys can try to work some language there so that it's not as prescriptive in a way that it seems to exclude anything that is not a contract or an award, which means different things to different people.
It might be something that the attorneys could weigh in on, just because some of the terms have legal implications, and they might have a simpler way of, not that they usually have simpler ways of saying things, but sometimes.
Costly way.
Sometimes
they do.
Simpler way. Someone had their hand up over here. Beth.
My suggestion, which, take or leave, was just kind of, or any award in a way that would cover any, Yeah. And then my other question, which isn't really content, is that you are changing the his/her in the A, but there are several other places throughout that all say his/her or he/she. So I didn't know if you want. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. I think we were focused in that area. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thank you. Anything else on that?
Nope.
And the last one? Oh, wait, no. Is that the last one?
Yeah, Board of Directors.
Okay.
Oh, no, there's two. There's the teacher.
Okay. The next one, there really isn't a change other than I guess there are two. Yes, there are two. One is just a simple one. D, it should say subcommittees instead of Board of Directors. And the substantive change would be on the next page, duties of the vice chair.
Surprise, Jen, you're the chair of the finance committee.
Yeah. I would have never taken this job.
So you just made my point. It's not in practice and it's not required. So we could just recommend crossing that out. And then the last paragraph, technically the secretary is the superintendent, but the designee. So we just put superintendent/designee because that's what I do to make it fit what we actually do. And then the last one. So basically, this is kind of a similar process that we did with the board self-evaluation. This actually is just like a schedule of payment. So that's what we'd like to do is have that change into an exhibit would still be posted. And then, so that's why it's crossed off. Well, it's crossed off for that reason, because it won't be a policy anymore, it'll become an exhibit. But in addition to that, we've changed some of the numbers on that, but we also created or used language on the next page. So that would become the policy, the substitute teachers and educational technicians policy. And then the exhibit that goes with it, I want to focus you on the change of the rates of pay. We have moved from 65 at if you look at section B, 65 at the daily rate for a high school diploma to 95, and then the others were the 2-year, 4-year, and certified teacher were all 85, and moving those to 95. Couple of reasons. One is we're really struggling to get substitutes. 2, the law has changed to minimum employment is $12 per hour. If you do the math, it's $84. So we were just above that anyway, so we would have had to change the high school one anyway. And then others locally, I think Dr. Foley was just at a GC meeting recently, and they were having a conversation that they're all looking to go to $100 or more. So there are our competitors. So this may even be, we may even be wanting to change it again in a few months. So this is what we're recommending for changes in paying substitutes.
So I just have a question as to why we're designating the difference between high school diploma, 2 years, 4 years, for
if everybody gets the same.
Everyone's getting the same.
I think it was there's a couple reasons. The long-term rate of pay matters a little bit. It matters because if you look at the long-term rate of pay, you have to be certified to be doing the long-term rate of pay, so that changes after 14 consecutive days in an assignment, you would go up. The other reason was so that you could see what we did. So I know it doesn't, we talked about collapsing it and just saying $95.
Right. I would say that just for people who don't know, it might be helpful to put on there that long-term rate of pay or long-term only you need to be a certified teacher.
I think it's in the policy, isn't it?
Is it in the policy?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't read it word for word. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So, quick question about the rate of pay. Do we see the same rates for all these different levels of certification among districts, across districts?
Oh, so I did a comparative. I had sent out and got a chart and put together a chart of who's paying what. And in more of our local, like people who would sub in those neighboring districts like Brunswick and so forth. So generally speaking, they were the lowest paid. There was one that was paying 80 currently, and then a couple of others were paying 85. Some were paying 90. Some were paying 92, and I believe there was one that was at 110. And the nurses were mostly 140 or 145. Cape Elizabeth is 210. So yes, I did some comparative shopping before, but that was all before Dr. Foley had her meeting with some of those same people and some other people. So there's some other districts there, and they're all raising it even more.
Yeah.
But if everybody raises it, we don't change the problem.
But Cynthia, I think her question is about
I mean, that's great information.
the different.
Do they distinguish between the levels?
Oh
right.
yes, there's multiple. They all do something a little different. They do distinguish between the levels. Some are even more detailed than others. So yes, they are all different.
So how do we end up deciding that we pay the same daily rate for a high school diploma, or a 4-year degree, or a certified teacher?
Because we can't get subs.
And because some districts don't distinguish, right? I mean, some do, but a lot of them will pay the same rate, just like we're going to, is my understanding.
Yeah, I've seen a variety, so I can't say for sure.
Right.
Well, you must get people who then turn down subbing positions if they're like, oh, it's just an ed tech spot, I'm going to get paid less. If you did pay less for, I mean, in the previous one you paid less, I think.
No, I think it was the same.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
I,
It was 85.
and I do think the job is the job.
Right.
I mean,
for sure.
it is. That's
Subs
yeah.
is that it should be like
They're doing the same
$200.
job.
They are doing the same job,
Yeah.
but generally speaking, in the marketplace, the higher the number of degrees that you have accumulated over your life and the experience, the higher rate you command in terms of what you get paid.
But for per diem, I mean, if it was your career, for sure. If you'd like to apply for a full-time position, we'd love to have your resume. If you want to show up when you want to show up, this is what you get paid.
Yeah, I mean this is what everyone does.
Right.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
It seems unusual,
Right.
but if that's
yeah,
what
I think
everyone
there are
does,
other people
then
that
it's
feel
usual.
that way. Yeah, yeah, it's not. I know I've heard other people say the same, similar. But in the very least, we have to pay at least 84.
Oh yes,
because
Yes.
that's minimum wage, so that's required.
Yeah.
But we did have somebody that said no, it's too low recently. With our current rate, not our new rate. They don't know that we're looking to do this. But
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea what the marketplace looks like out there.
Right.
But if we can attract more certified teachers to sub because we pay them more, it's a better experience for the students. So we don't necessarily want to have high school diploma people being substituting if we can have people with more experience and more education doing that same job. And if we
Unfortunately, the
offer
problem
more
is
pay,
I think
maybe
the
we
pool
get-
is too
Yeah.
small to distinguish.
Right.
Maybe they're just not enough.
Well,
Yeah.
right. I would agree with you if it was a
big pool.
robust market for substitute teachers. We have, for the new board members, we have gone to a system where even if our teachers that are teaching will help us out, we pay them during their planning period to go help cover a class. Our principals are covering classes a lot. So we're not in that market where,
That's why Jen's teaching health.
yes, yes, you heard her mention that. Yeah.
Great.
I'm just wondering, and it might be taken right off the table, but I was a sub, and I was appointed to this before I knew you couldn't be a sub when I took this. So
Sorry about that.
So there's no, we vote as a board. So if we're so desperate, is there wiggle room?
That's a conflict of interest, unfortunately. You can't work for the district. You can't get paid for the district and be on the governing body.
I read all my things, but it seems silly. I just got to say it. It seems silly.
I think that's a state law. I don't think we
Yeah,
can change that
that's
one.
not,
that's
that's
okay.
not us.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
Right.
not just RSU 5.
Okay. All right. I just was like,
No,
but if
I
you
know.
want to sub for free, that would be
No.
great.
I'm not even sure you could do that. You could sub in a different district. Yeah.
Yes, you can.
Because you could
sub
work in a
different
different district,
Yeah,
too.
she could be a
right?
teacher in a different district. Yeah.
We did.
But it's an interesting concept, right? Like, do people look at it and go, "Oh, 85, that's not worth my time," but I do it for 95 for $10 for the day? Yeah, I guess. Right, if it's 110
every day.
Yeah, true.
Adds up.
If you're subbing consistently, it adds up.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm just curious if everybody goes, "Okay, we're at 100. Have we helped anybody other than the subs?" Which
They
is
haven't
great.
done it yet, but that's why we're saying we may. That's why another reason we want it as an exhibit, because then we
You
can,
can adjust
be
it.
responsive and adjust it in 6 months if we need to, and not bring it back as a policy. But you'd be obviously aware.
Has anybody, I mean, not that I'm certainly not in favor of this, has anybody run the math on what this costs, the increase, for the rest of this budget year? Because this is effective immediately.
No. But we're desperate.
I just sort of unrelated but related to substitute teaching. I know you put, you advertise, right, to get subs, because I was always under the belief that I think a lot of people think that you can't sub unless you're like actually our teacher. Like I think people would be really surprised. Some people may be surprised to know that with a high school diploma you can be a substitute teacher. I mean, I think there's a lot of people out there that may not know that.
We've participated in some substitute job fairs.
Mhm.
We've with other districts, and we've done a lot of sort of outreach, and the principals have done some of that. We're trying to make it easier. We set it up so that they can sign on a computer over here and get their fingerprinting registration. They
And we pay
fill
for
out
that for
the
them now, right?
Yes, we do. If they, I think we return it in 5. If they sub 5 days, we reimburse it.
Yeah.
And somebody helps them fill out applications. I mean, we really try a lot to support it, and then we interview them right in the moment and check the rest. So we have done some proactive work in the last 3 years, at least once a year, if not more. But then we have an ongoing process as well that's internal. It's still hard.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Kate.
I think I ask this every year, but what is the economics around having full-time subs rotated through the district? Like they're
yes, the bench
full-time
sub.
employees.
I was gonna say what
That's
Ray calls
what
them that, right?
yeah,
the
that's
bench teacher.
We have
okay,
debated
I thought you said
that.
another word.
Yes, we've debated that amongst the administrative team. I am not in support of that because the minute you do that, you're paying benefits. I mean, it's and so we have 2 subs on any given day. We need so many more than that. That I think that we've come down as a administrative team feeling like that's not the best use of the district dollars.
You keep raising the sub rate. At some point, it might be.
It may be.
That's
You're
what I'm
right.
saying.
You're right.
So,
Yeah.
like, I'm wondering if anybody has looked at what that break-even number is.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you're going to need multiple ones. You're going to need 6. You're going to need more than 6 on any given day.
But if you have a few that are
Yeah.
baked in that you know you have, then that's that many fewer you need to find in the market.
That's correct.
Thank you for my economics.
or it could be a like a part-time cap-out kind of position that you could, somebody's on staff like 3 days a week or something, so you're not looking at paying the benefits, but you know that they'd be available these certain 3 days a week or something like that.
All right.
Sorry, but I had one more question.
Yeah,
This
sure.
is about the responsibilities of the chair. F reads, restrict discussion when a motion is before the board.
I
We
read
usually
that.
have a motion on the floor and
And
then we
discuss
open the
board.
discussion.
Yes. So, yeah, I was curious about that. It's duties of the chair. Which letter is it?
It's F.
F.
I would have said open up discussion when a
Right.
motion is before the board, not the
Yeah.
opposite.
Yeah, it's on page 2 of 2, the first one.
Oh, are you saying it should we restrict discussion to when a motion is before the board? Is that-
Generally, we do it before the
Right.
motion, after the
So
motion.
restrict
We
it
don't
to
put
when,
any
so not
restrictions.
We talk all around the motion.
All right. The chair decides, given any circumstance, whether it's better to do it before the motion or after the motion is on the table, on the floor.
Right.
Right, because I always thought that technically it was supposed to be once the motion was on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have a motion, you have a second, okay, we discuss it.
Technically, that is correct, but we don't always follow that order.
Right.
And it's nice to have the flexibility to do it whichever way seems to be most appropriate.
Can we just put restricts discussions as needed?
Or just remove it altogether.
No, I was kidding. I would recommend just removing it altogether. But
I was just thinking when there's a motion before the board, you have to restrict the discussion to just the motion. That's how I was interpreting it.
okay, restrict discussion to the motion on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, we could
okay.
clarify that. Because
Yeah, we definitely don't want people going off topic. Right.
So like if you have a motion on the
to
if you have a
To a
motion,
motion that is
before.
before the board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's better. Thanks, Kate. The only other question that when I was reading that first, the accountability reporting to the public. So the district report card, thank you for telling us where that is. Where's the district annual report? It is? Okay.
It's at central office.
So the shall prepare and present to the board at an annual report. Do we do that? If we're trying to get our stuff in line with what we're actually doing?
To me, that's the goals that we present every year.
That's the annual report? Okay. Okay.
And then that's always posted.
You're right. It's always on the site.
We could make sure we start calling it the annual report.
Yeah. The abridged version. Okay. Any other? Oh, you have another question?
Yeah, the district report cards and the way we do this scorecard, there are a couple of things that had been crossed out that used to be on the list that we don't actually include in the scorecard, like the attendance rates for elementary schools.
But I
Is
think
that
they're all.
still
Well, I
something
think
that's
that
required?
our scorecard is not the same as a report card.
Right.
Oh, okay.
So the report card is what she said is actually uploaded
And it's
onto the
on
main
here.
DOE
The attendance
site.
is on here.
So it might be on there.
It's yeah, it's right on there. So that's why I brought this tonight, because I thought it would be confusing.
All right. So what am I looking for? I'm looking for a motion for consideration and approval. You're all. Oh yeah. Thank you for the first read. Do we have a second?
Well, we already
Beth?
discussed it.
Yeah.
No more discussion. I shall restrict discussion, and we will vote. All those in favor of the first read? Great.
I just want to ask, was that Beth that did the second?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And just for Susanna's benefit, so we'll read. This will come back again at the next one for a second read with the adjustments, and then it becomes policy after that vote. And now we have a motion for consideration and approval to rescind the following policy advisory committees of the board.
Yes, this is a redundant policy. I feel like it might have been pulled over when there was consolidation. Charlotte Bates at MSMA, she said there's no reason to have this because it's included in another policy, and I meant to write down the policy. It's one that we already reviewed this year, and I'm just going to try to get it for you so that, let's see. Okay.
So do we have a copy of that one?
That's what she's looking for.
Oh, okay.
Which one it is?
Okay.
But it's not in our packet.
It's
No.
it's called, no, it's not, because it's not up. It's BDF, and it's called Board of Directors Advisory Committees, and it's much lengthier and covers what's here. So that's why we are asking to rescind that one.
Okay. So I would take a motion for consideration, and this isn't a 1-2. This is once we
Done.
vote, it's done. Okay. So Maddie, second. Vali.
So I have a comment.
Yeah.
In the future, when we have something that needs
Sure.
to be rescinded, I would love to read it before I rescind it, especially if it's a final vote.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, this is what it's being rescinded. This is exactly what's being rescinded. Oh, I thought you were saying which one is the duplicate.
Oh.
No, it is in the packet. Sorry.
You don't have it.
Oh, I don't have it.
Your page is
Oh,
Thank you.
okay. I thought you meant the other one.
I
to
did
see
too.
it. Okay.
No,
Like-
no, this one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we'll take care of that for you, Valley. Done.
Sorry.
All right. All those in favor? None opposed. Thank you. Unfinished business? None. 13, new business. Consideration and approval for the 2020-2021. That's fun to say. School calendar, first read.
Hi again. Okay. So it's the gray sheet handout. So the calendar is on the back, and the memo. I'm sure you've read it. It's going. I think we talked about this probably early September. The big thing we talked about was going before Labor Day. We have done it in the past. In fact, our first year here, we had started before Labor Day. When the Labor Day falls on the last, if it starts, the month starts on a Tuesday, then Labor Day goes all the way till the next Monday. So that's the case that's coming up. So we had agreed to that. And then the calendar provides, again, 5.5 days of professional learning throughout the school year. In addition to the 2 days of professional learning prior to the first student day, 3 full days will occur
just like last year, October, February, and March, thus providing an uninterrupted flow. That's why we decided to do that last year, of student learning from December through February due to snow days and basically due to that, snow days. And then the 0.5 Professional Learning Day will be held in early November. This date was moved. We did it this year on a Friday, the first Friday in November. We have elected all 3 of the districts that meet together to create this calendar, agreed, and our administrative team really highly supported it, that we move it to the voting day on that Tuesday, even though it cuts up the week for a couple of reasons. It's a big election, it's the presidential election, and they're in our schools. And so there are probably going to be a lot more people voting, and it might be interesting. So, trying to guard my words carefully. And then we'll continue with the same 2 early release days, pairing them on Wednesdays so that we get more benefit of our extended staff meeting days. It actually makes it like a 4-hour professional development opportunity on those days, and we're aligned with the other districts in that way as well. And so the calendar on the back. The other piece that I think it's important to know, our October 9th day and our March, well, is it October 9th this coming year? Yes, October 9th, that first PLD day in the fall, and our March 12th day, which align to what we're doing this year. Those 2 days we've used really wisely for all our itinerant staff with GC and professional development. And we all talked about, let's make sure we're doing those days again next year, if possible. So, so it's 11 districts, so that we can have our itinerant staff, do some professional work together. And they're really loving that. We're getting really great feedback around that. So that's another reason to keep those days the same.
How do we stack up with Brunswick and 75?
Do I dare say? 2 days.
Wow.
Yeah, it was slick this year.
So
I kind of
so what that means,
really proud of that.
is because we share the Region 10 technical school, we can't, by state law, we can't be more than 5 days off from each other in our schedule. So we work with both of Brunswick and 75, which is Topsom, Harpswell. Yeah. So to make sure that we stay within those 5 days. Now, snow days don't count and those sort of things, but our approved calendars have to be within 5 days of each other. And usually we're like 4.5.
And 1 day often makes it, 1 day different from one other district makes it 2 days, because all 3 have to be in school on the same day. So if we change one, it impacts it by more than one. So it's tricky. And because they all feed to Region 10 too, we want to make sure that the kids are.
Which is why we do it, right? Because if we didn't have Region 10, we wouldn't care what their calendar was.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Well,
so I ask that this every year, but I always get the sense that having a half PLD is a little bit of a waste of not having the kids in school for the entire day to only have half a day of PD.
It's contractual.
Yeah.
That 0.5 day. It's in their contract.
I'm wondering if next time we negotiate, we can try to up it to a full day, or I don't know. It just seems silly that we count the days, snow days, and then all of a sudden there's no one in school. The teachers are not in school, and the students are not in school, and it's a perfectly fine.
Which one are you talking about? The half PLD day? Isn't that
teachers are in school for half a day?
Right. Yeah. But for the other half, no one's here.
Right. That's correct. What day is that?
In here it's and here's the election day.
Oh, that's the election
which works
day.
out great because then they can go vote.
Yeah. It doesn't say it does say half day.
Yeah.
No students.
No.
And it's only a half
like
PLD.
This year it was the same, but it was on that Friday. It was that 0.5 on the Friday.
Many of our teachers stay the whole day, but they don't have to.
Right.
I'm cringing because as a parent, that's all.
Yeah.
I am too as a parent.
And is it because it's a Tuesday?
I'm not cringing like, oh, the teachers only have to do half a day. That's not what I meant.
Right, just that you have a Tuesday with no school.
Right.
Yeah, it's sort of random. But
Yeah.
I think that's not uncommon for national elections.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, particularly because, I mean, the high school's a little different because they can really, like, segregate that part of the voting off. I mean, Durham, they literally, like, walk right into the school, right? I mean, they share half the gym. Well, for the...
Jen's actually shared concern because they can do some. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
So I think from a security standpoint, it makes more sense. Yep. So, any other? What were versions 1 and 2?
Versions 1 and 2. Oh, I think we played around version 1. Well, we played around a little bit with the PLD, 2 PLD days at the beginning.
Yeah.
Nothing like dramatically. I did.
That was version 1.
I
version
want
2
you to
was
know.
February break.
I was waiting for Kate to bring that one up.
I wasn't going to bring it up unless you did, but I will tell you, I did follow through, and I each time we met, I said, "Now, did you check with your, boards?" And yes, one of them was dead silence, and the other one I cannot repeat.
No, it's February break is usually the one
and
we
they
want
laughed
to dump,
when
right?
they said it, but
Yeah.
it was accurate. It was.
Well,
they told the
it's consolidate them, right?
It was something no.
Yes. Blank, no. Fill in your blank.
Yeah.
Got it.
But I do want you
We
to know
appreciate
that
you,
I
and
did.
we're going to... That's right.
Yeah. That board member may be gone next year.
That's right.
Yeah, try again. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so any other questions, comments on the... Yeah.
I just wanted to follow up from last year's discussion when we had the kids go back on this Thursday, Friday after Christmas.
Oh.
Remember we went back and forth?
Mm-hmm.
I asked people and surveyed people, and always parents with young children loved that. And parents with older children didn't love that. It was, I ran into Emily at the grocery store, and she and I talked about that because she has little ones, and
She was
very
ready for them
happy
to go back.
for them to go back.
Yeah.
Funny.
Well, now they'll... Well,
Right, now the poor teachers are going to be dealing with them for the 2 days before they go on vacation.
Christmas break.
Monday,
yeah, or
Tuesday.
holiday break.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh, well.
I mean, it's sort of the opposite of this year, but
Yeah.
it is what it is. So I'm just glad it's not 2 full weeks because that's rough.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So, all right. So I would take a motion for consideration and approval of the 2020-2021. I can't wait to say that during the budget process 8,000 times. School calendar. Valley, Jen, thank you. All those in favor?
Thank you.
None opposed? Great. Thanks for your hard work on that, Cynthia.
Welcome. Happy to do it. And I did.
All right, so no personnel. Back to public comment. I was going to say, there actually was someone who was here. I don't know if she had something that she wanted to share. No? Oh, okay. All right, so then we will move on to 16, executive session. So I would take a motion for to enter into executive session as outlined in 1 MRSA section 4056A for the purpose of discussing the superintendent's evaluation performance goals. Maddie, Candy, thank you. All those in favor? Great. We are in executive session 931.